Story 1.
Anniversary bombshell, discovering my wife's cheating and friend's betrayal at a family gathering. I woke up one Sunday morning, rolling over to gaze at my wife of 5 years, Rose. She woke up too, pulling my head toward hers and gently kissing me. Acknowledging Rose's fatigue, she mentioned that I had worn her out the previous night. I explained that my intention was to get her pregnant. Reassuringly, she wrapped her arms around me and conveyed that I would get her pregnant, asking me to be patient. We lay in bed, chatting as usual. Our conversation revolved around her work, with Rose determined to secure a promotion to the regional sales management position. After a few minutes of the familiar work-related discussion, I suggested she take a shower, while Rose suggested that I shower. She agreed with the plan for me to run out and grab one of my specialty coffees. As I headed toward the door, I realized I had forgotten my car keys and turned back. Knowing Rose kept a key to my car in her purse for emergencies, I spotted her purse on the kitchen counter. Instead of going back upstairs, I decided to retrieve the key from her purse. Digging through the clutter, I discovered a zipper on the inside. Unzipping the compartment, I found the birth control pills Rose had promised to stop taking. She had gone off birth control a couple of months ago as we were trying to start a family. Examining the package, I noticed a third of the pills were missing. Turning it over, I saw the prescription label with a date only a few weeks ago, indicating she was still on birth control. I put everything back as I found it, and quietly went upstairs to get my keys without Rose hearing me. On my way to get her coffee, my mind was buzzing with thoughts. I couldn't fathom why she would lie to me about being off birth control. I was confident she wasn't having an affair, as when she wasn't at work, she was with me. Her close girlfriend was the only variable, but her husband was also my best friend. I felt I knew where she was almost all the time, except during work hours. Feeling truly disappointed and under the impression that she didn't want to have kids despite seeming to be trying, I was lost in my thoughts. Around 4 p.m., Rose shook me out of my reverie. Observing my distant demeanor, she encouraged me to prepare, emphasizing that we were running late for dinner at Bill and Sherry's. Additionally, Bill had requested her assistance in his shop afterward. Upon arriving at their place, Bill sensed that something was amiss and asked about it. Initially, I insisted that nothing was wrong, but he persisted, claiming to know me better than I knew myself. He urged me to share my concerns. Reluctantly, I disclosed what I had discovered, that Rose had stopped taking the pill a couple of months ago. We explored potential reasons for her actions when Bill suggested the idea of hiring a private investigator. He emphasized my emotional state and noted that only a few hours had passed, assuring me that Rose wasn't having an affair. When I questioned him to provide evidence, he suggested, "If you're so sure she isn't, what are you afraid of? Hire a PI. Once he confirms she's not involved with someone else, you can talk to her about kids and maybe better understand why she lied about taking the pill." On Monday morning, I enlisted the services of a private investigatora professional our company utilized for security matters and other concerns. After a conversation, the PI reassured me that it didn't seem like Rose was having an affair based on the information I provided. He informed me that he would conduct some checks both during her work hours and off-duty. I also expressed the need to look into her medical records, as women can have unexpected issues. Despite periodic check-ins from the PI, I received no significant updates. Despite my attempts to conceal my emotions, I found myself unable to engage in closeness with Rose. Finally, on Saturday, Rose confronted me, demanding an explanation for my avoidance. Attempting to shift the blame, I accused her of lacking interest in closeness, triggering a major argument, her first significant fight. When I confided in Bill about it, he warned me that unless I changed my behavior quickly, Rose would suspect something was amiss. Taking Bill's advice to heart, I humbly sought forgiveness, attributing my actions to fear. Rose appeared puzzled but now also concerned, making me wonder if she might be having an affair for the first time. As the days passed, I struggled to maintain my sanity. Bill played a crucial role in helping me stay focused and optimistic. In the middle of the third week, I began thinking about Rose's upcoming 25th birthday and wanted to plan something special. Taking inspiration from Bill's wife, Sherry, I decided on a half-50 theme birthday party, including a walking cane cut in half and other creative elements. During a Thursday morning meeting with the PI, which I expected to last no more than 30 minutes, we ended up talking for over 2 hours. After the PI departed, I sat in a daze until the phone rang. Knowing I had met with the PI, Bill called me and we arranged to meet. I needed a drink, a strong one, and by the time Bill joined me at the bar, I was on my third. Seeing my condition, Bill remarked, "This isn't good, is it?" The initial shock was wearing off, replaced by intense anger. As I slid the folder over for Bill to peruse, I briefed him on the condensed version of the PI's findings. Bill examined the pictures with times and dates, inquiring about the CD in the folder. I explained it was a video of Rose and her boss in an intimate situation. The PI had advised me to watch the video and, more importantly, listen to the dialogue. Bill called his wife and instructed her to take Rose to the movies or the mall under the guise of planning her birthday party. Sherry, enthusiastic about helping with a positive surprise for Rose, complied. Bill and I watched the CD, and it brought tears to my eyes. The PI was correct. He was genuinely surprised by Rose's motive for being with her boss. She was pursuing the promotion she had discussed for months. We sat in silence, simply asking if we wanted another drink. After a while, I confided in Bill, expressing that if Rose had come to me and confessed to falling in love with her boss or needing more satisfaction than she was getting from me, I felt I could handle it. While I acknowledged I would be hurt and disappointed, the idea of witnessing my wife with her boss just to secure a promotion went beyond mere hurt. I conveyed that I was not only hurt, but also furious, and I made it clear that Rose would feel the full extent of my anger. Bill then remarked that observing Rose and her boss was like seeing her physically there but emotionally absent. He noted that regardless, she had prioritized her job over our marriage, and now she would have to live with that choice. Handing me my drink, Bill added that the girls would be home soon, and asked if I knew what I was going to do. I responded, stating that I believed I knew what to do. Looking up at Bill, I continued by sharing that next Monday was Rose's birthday, and I was determined to give her a surprise birthday party she would never forget. Acknowledging the need to act fast, I mentioned that I would require Bill's help and proposed involving Sherry if that was acceptable to him. Bill agreed, stating that Sherry and Rose were close, assuring me that Sherry wouldn't do anything to hurt Rose. He clarified that Sherry wouldn't be involved for that purpose, however. He noted that Sherry knew all the people to invite and emphasized the importance of my presence at the party to help execute his plan. Feigning more intoxication than I was, I successfully avoided Rose when the girls returned home. The next workday, I consulted with a computer-savvy colleague in the shipping department, detailing my requirements for pictures and a video which he assured me he could easily create. I called Sherry and shared with her that I planned to use her idea but wanted the party to be a surprise. I suggested having it on Sunday afternoon around 3 p.m. and asked for her assistance. Sherry enthusiastically agreed. I instructed her to contact all the people for the party and mentioned that she would need to get Rose out of the house on Sunday for a few hours. Just before we hung up, I told her I would inform Rose's parents. Next, I went over to Rose's work, asking her to lunch, which she told me she couldn't do as she was to be in a meeting. That was fine, because the reason I went there was to invite her boss to her birthday party. I informed him about a surprise birthday party I was planning for her and expressed that it would be great if he could attend. I suggested bringing his wife, adding that it would be a fun gathering. I expressed my hope that he could come and requested that, if possible, he should park at the grade school. This way, when Rose's friend brought her home, she wouldn't see all the cars. I mentioned that a friend of mine would be escorting the guests from the school to my house and emphasized that it would be a fun event. I concluded by expressing my hope that he could make it. Next, after work, I went to Rose's parents' house, telling them my idea for the birthday party. Rose's mom gathered some pictures of Rose from childbirth up to our wedding. Later that night, I went to the computer guy's house. I showed him everything I had and gave him my idea of how I wanted the evening to go. He didn't say much, but after listening to me, he suggested a different way, which would have a more significant impact on everyone. I liked what he suggested, and after agreeing to his idea, he told me he would have it done and ready for me by Saturday. Wednesday, I went to a lawyer's office and initiated divorce proceedings, with the reason being infidelity. Additionally, the attorney suggested pursuing legal action against her boss and the company they work for, expressing confidence in obtaining compensation from Rose's company. On Friday evening, I had Bill sitting across the table from me. I commented that when you think things can't get worse, they seem to find a way. Bill asked me in response what I meant. Well, Wednesday, when I went to see the attorney, I spent more time there than I thought I would. When I left the attorney's office, my mind was filled with my marriage problems, causing me to forget to go back to work and send off the bid for a job. The company lost out on the job, so today they suspended me for 30 days without pay. If it weren't for my boss, who knows that my marriage is going down the tubes, I would have been fired. My boss, though, wants me far away from Rose in this mess so I can get my head screwed back on. He gave me his timeshare that he has in Mexico to use, telling me that if I want to keep my job, I'll be in Mexico no later than Wednesday. Bill inquired if I was going. I replied affirmatively, expressing that I couldn't afford to lose this job. I suggested we proceed with discussing the details and potential scenarios at Rose's surprise birthday party. I explained how the pictures were going to be displayed, and also how I hoped the evening would go once I started the picture event. Bill was to ensure that Rose's boss didn't get away, as I wanted him to see the entire show. I also told Bill that the person playing the bartender would also be serving the divorce papers to Rose and papers to her boss. Arriving home, Rose was upset and demanded to know my whereabouts. I explained that I was with Bill. She dismissed it, saying it was no big deal. However, she disagreed, arguing that it was a big deal because she had come home early with great news and I wasn't there. Rose accused me of excessive drinking and avoidance, stating that it seemed like I had a girlfriend. My face turned red, fueled by anger. Seeing my reaction, Rose appeared concerned. How could she accuse me of having a girlfriend while she pursued a job promotion by being involved with her boss? On the verge of losing my temper, Bill's voice echoed in my head, prompting me to apologize, deny having a girlfriend, and inquire about the good news. She shared with great excitement that she got the promotion, and starting next month, she would be the new regional sales manager. Rose expressed her joy by jumping up and down, then running into my arms and hugging me tightly, surprising me again when I didn't think she could. With her arms still around me, hugging me tight, Rose conveyed, "Now we'll get that baby we want." Pushing her back to arm's length, I inquired about the meaning behind her words. Rose promptly nestled herself back into my chest and conveyed that our luck was changing, expressing a sense that things were going our way. She shared the news of her promotion and professed her love, confidently anticipating that I would be the one to make her pregnant. Following that, she looked up at me and sought confirmation about my desire for a baby. Rose, seeing the tears in my eyes, thought they were because of the baby, when in fact, the tears were because I was soon going to lose the only woman I have ever been in love with. Grabbing me by the hand, Rose led me to her bedroom. We climaxed together. Rose expressed a desire for closeness again on Saturday morning, and I complied, although my involvement was perfunctory. While I was in the shower, Rose entered with a concerned expression and inquired about any concerns bothering me. She conveyed surprise at her recent inability to outlast me in lovemaking. In response, I encouraged her not to dismiss the possibility that something might be wrong. I pointed out my altered behavior over the past few weeks and the excessive consumption of drinks. Swiftly changing the subject, I admitted feeling responsible for our inability to conceive, suggesting a potential issue with my body. I proposed the idea of seeking medical advice, considering she had been off the pill for several months. Looking at her, I mentioned, "Maybe there is something wrong with my body and I should see a doctor. After all, you have been off the pill for several months now, right?" Rose took hold of me, and without directly addressing my question, proceeded to provide a significant pep talk, emphasizing that I was placing too much pressure on myself. She also said that now she has gotten her promotion at work, she too will be more relaxed, and even though she just can't explain it, she knows that I'll get her knocked up very soon. I thought to myself, I bet you could explain it if you wanted to. Saturday night, Rose wanted lovemaking again, but this time I did too. It would be the last time for us, so I gave her all I had. I think, though, she could tell that there was very little love in my lovemaking. It was just lovemaking. Sunday morning came, and I wasn't as nervous as I thought I would be. While Rose was taking a shower, I called Sher, asking if she had a plan to get Rose out of the house. Sherry assured me that she did, and told me she was proud of me for giving this party for Rose, as she knew Rose would always remember it. I nearly chuckled, thinking she'd remember this for quite some time. When she descended the stairs, I inquired about her plans for the day. "Why?" she asked. I explained Bill had called, needing my help with Cher's honey-do list. Rose responded, "Great," as Cher planned breakfast for the four of us, followed by helping her choose bedroom drapes. At 3:10, Sherry followed Rose into our house, everyone shouting, "Surprise!" Rose, greatly surprised, approached me with a big hug, thanking me as she had no clue about the birthday party. Scanning the guests, I heard Rose ask Sherry if she invited her boss. Sherry's negative response brought back that worried look on Rose's face. With my two key people in place, the party kicked off with people laughing and mingling. I waited for almost 2 hours to ensure everyone had food, mostly lots of booze. With Bill's help, we gathered everyone in the living room, preparing for the show of the year. Addressing everyone, I expressed gratitude for their presence and suggested taking a look at the first half of Rose's 50th birthday, before proceeding with the opening of cards and gifts. Smiling at Rose's parents, her cousin, and her boss with his wife, I gestured for everyone to be seated. Once everyone was settled, anticipation filled the room as they knew the theme of the party. Switching on the TV and my laptop, I announced, "Here we go." The first picture displayed Rose at 2 months old, unclothed, lying on the bed. Whistles and jeers followed my comment, noting the nice spot on her. Rose blushed deeply as subsequent pictures slowly appeared on the screen. I joked or explained each picture, occasionally seeking input from her mom, resulting in teasing moments. From grade school to high school, I highlighted Rose's unwavering motivation. College pictures showcased her determination, including snagging me. Laughter echoed, and Rose enjoyed the show. Our wedding picture followed, with comments about my long hair. A picture of Rose's workplace appeared, then her desk, earned through promotion as the top salesperson. The next picture showed Rose's boss with his wife at our table during the Moss party. Rose sat next to her boss, another employee beside her, with me absent. Rose's smile faded, replaced by a worried look, glancing at her boss, who also lost his smile. I suspected exchanged glances. I expressed hope that Rose's boss acknowledges her dedication, hard work, and aids her in securing the coveted regional sales manager position. As I finished, I looked directly at Rose, sensing fear, as she had revealed her promotion to me. I started the video, emphasizing Rose's hard work for the new position. More pictures, everyone. The video displayed an empty bed with Rose, telling her boss it was the last time as per their agreement. The video transitioned to Rose on the bed, with her boss between her legs. Simultaneously, her boss urged her to take certain actions if she desired the promotion. This led to gasps and some people leaving as the video swiftly changed to depict Rose on her hands and knees with her boss behind her, holding on to her hip, engaging in a specific intimate position. During the transition, her boss expressed satisfaction, noting that with this performance, she would be promoted to the vice president status. The video had played for about seconds, with an additional seconds left, showcasing 2 more positions, but chaos erupted. Rose, in a frenzy, screamed for me to turn it off, tearfully apologizing. Her boss attempted a swift exit, but my friend Bill instructed him to stay put. A punch to the jaw from Bill left her boss seated when he tried to push past. My ally shouted the boss's name, and when the foolish person responded, he was served legal papers, tossed into his lap. Sherry, attempting to console Rose, missed the boss's wife approaching. Seizing Sherry by the hair, she shoved her, causing Sherry to fall onto the couch where they were seated. As Sherry fell, she pulled on Rose's arm, turning her to face the boss's wife. While insulting my wife, the boss's wife landed a right hook on Rose's cheekbone. Rose was propelled backward, landing on her side. Sherry leaped up, yelling as she grabbed the boss's wife. Bill swiftly approached the women, and when Sherry was shoved again, Bill caught her before she hit the floor. I hurried over to intervene, but with Rose on the ground and Bill holding Sherry, I thought the worst was over. The boss lady turned, looking at Rose and hurling insults. Rose, now on her hands and knees, reached over to place her hand on the ottoman, slowly lifting her knee and attempting to stand. Rose tried to stand, but her head was still spinning from the punch. This left her back toward the boss lady, with her legs about a foot apart. I reached Rose to help her up and ensure she didn't get hit again. Turning my head to check the boss lady's location, I saw her take a full step toward my wife. Then, like an NFL punter, she kicked Rose squarely between her legs. Just as I put my hand on Rose's arm, I felt the impact rock her entire body. If the boss lady were punting a football, it would have easily gone 40 yards. Rose's body went 2 feet up and 3 feet forward. Rose let out a scream louder than I had ever heard. Landing on top of the ottoman and bouncing off, she fell onto her side. Rose screamed from the moment she was kicked until she finally landed on the carpet. Once on the carpet, Rose's knees came up to her chest, hands between her legs, crying harder than I had ever heard anyone cry. Bill seized the boss lady by the back of the neck, pulling her out of the house and directing her and her husband to leave. As Bill forced her out, the boss lady shouted that a particular circumstance wouldn't lead to a promotion now. Sherry hurried over, kneeling down to assist Rose and shouting at me to step back. Disregarding Sherry, I approached Rose's side, reassuring her that I had not intended for anyone to damage her. Rose was in so much pain that I know she didn't hear me. Then, looking down, I saw blood seeping into her cotton pants. I grabbed Sherry to get her attention, pointing to the blood. Sherry quickly told me to call an ambulance. I didn't ride with Rose in the ambulance, but instead took my car. I hadn't planned on this physical assault, nor had I wanted Rose physically hurt. I wasn't sure what I was going to do at this time. Bill, Sherry, and I were in the waiting room when the emergency doctor came to talk to us. He informed me that Rose was going in for surgery as soon as the specialist got there. He asked me what happened, and I told him that she was kicked in the groin by another woman. After a few more questions, he asked me if I wanted to see her, which I said no. A few hours later, the operating doctor approached me to provide an update. They mentioned having never seen an injury like this, explaining that the impact had struck her at the base of her love button area, causing the tissue to explode in 3 directions due to the force. The doctor stated that they had repaired everything, but expressed concern about her love button. They conveyed that if it didn't repair itself, it could have an impact on her ability to enjoy intimacy. I inquired about the details. The doctor explained that the love button area plays a role in stimulating women during intimacy, contributing to enjoyment and aiding in achieving pleasure. They expressed concern that if the area didn't heal properly, it could make it challenging, if not impossible, for her to experience pleasure. The doctor mentioned she would be in recovery for a couple of hours, and then I could visit her. Leaving the hospital a few minutes later, Bill stayed with Sherry. There, we stopped for a meal, conversed for a while, and then I went home. On Monday morning around a.m., Sherry called me, asking when I would be visiting Rose. I wasn't sure, possibly tomorrow. Sherry pressed me, and I decided to hang up and turn off my phone. On Tuesday, I entered Rose's room just after lunch. Sherry gave me a disapproving look as I approached the side of Rose's bed. Without giving Rose a chance to speak, I began explaining. I admitted that I aimed to humiliate and embarrass her, wanting everyone to know that Shinat Mehad caused the end of our marriage. I accused her of lying about being off birth control and being unfaithful. Despite my anger, I emphasized that I never intended or desired any physical damage to befall her. I clarified that despite being extremely upset, the thought of physically hurting her never crossed my mind. I expressed the hope that she would believe me. Tears streamed down Rose's face, prompting me to turn to leave. However, Rose reached out and grabbed my hand, pleading with me not to go. Rose assured me that she trusted I wouldn't damage her physically. She implored me to stay and talk with her, but I declined, stating that I couldn't. I explained that due to the emotional turmoil caused by her infidelity, my mind and heart were in disarray, leading to a significant mistake at work. While the corporate higher-ups contemplated firing me, my boss, who knew about our marital problems, intervened and prevented them from terminating my employment. As a result, I informed Rose that I would be leaving town for a month. However, I'm facing disciplinary action again. With my boss's assistance, I've been suspended for 30 days without pay. I have a month to address our problems and straighten out my thoughts. My boss has offered me his timeshare in Mexico and allowed me to cash out the 3 weeks of unused vacation. Sherry exclaimed that I couldn't leave Rose because she needed me. I looked at Sherry and explained that I could leave, emphasizing that I couldn't risk losing my job. I mentioned having a great teacher, pointing to Rousseau had taught me to prioritize my job over my marriage. Rose quickly interjected, expressing her apologies. Addressing Rose, I said, "There's one more thing. I'm far from finished with your boss. I will make him pay for this, assuring you that a storm is coming for that idiot. My intention is not to bring any repercussions your way. I'm telling you this because I believe he'll throw you under the bus to save himself. The house has been cleaned, all remnants of the party disposed of. On the kitchen table, you'll find materials from the PI and divorce papers for you to sign." Speaking of divorce papers made Rose squeeze my hand hard, hoping I wouldn't be able to pull away as tears flowed again. "Rose, I left that material not to cause you more pain, but just in case you can use any of it to protect yourself from your boss. I think, and I hope, you get yourself a good lawyer, Rose." "Well, I have to get going, as I have a plane to catch." Rose insisted that she wouldn't sign the divorce papers until we had a lengthy conversation. I shook my head and conveyed to her that she still didn't understand. I asserted that she was no longer in control, emphasizing that I didn't have to do anything for her. Pulling my hand away, I added that she had messed that up. As I started to walk out, Rose shouted, pleading for me to wait. I stopped and turned toward her. With tears streaming down her face, Rose expressed her profound love for me. She asked if, upon my return, I would please meet with her. At that moment, I said, "Rose, I'll have to say no. It hurts too much just to be here with you. Maybe after I get back, I'll think differently." Bill awaited me outside the hospital to provide transportation to the airport. The ride was quiet, given that Bill was already informed about most of the details surrounding the events and my strategy concerning Rose's boss. I directed him to keep me informed of any developments related to Rose's boss, and he agreed to do so. Additionally, Bill offered to provide updates on Rose's situation. Curious, I inquired about the reason I would want him to keep me updated. Bill chuckled and replied, conveying that I still loved her, which I acknowledged with laughter. I admitted to loving her but emphasized that I couldn't allow anyone to walk over me. Second story, at 32 years old, I am currently in the process of divorcing my 33-year-old wife after discovering that my 5-year-old son is not biologically mine. A couple of weeks ago, I uncovered my wife's infidelity from 6 years ago. Her sister disclosed this information during a visit to discuss the delivery of her first child. According to her sister, my wife admitted to sleeping with her best friend while intoxicated 6 years ago, expressing remorse at that time. Upon learning this, I promptly took a paternity test with my son, fearing the worst. The results, a week later, confirmed that my son is not my biological child. Strangely, I began to perceive the boy differently, more like an acquaintance than a son. Armed with evidence, I confronted my wife at night when the child was sleeping. Despite her inquiries about who told me, I maintained that it was none of her business, even though she would likely connect the dots to her sister. Initiating divorce proceedings left her devastated, despite her multiple assurances that nothing had happened with anyone else since then, and claims of faithfulness in body and soul. I refrained from insulting her to avoid complications during the divorce. Despite my disbelief and her blaming of alcohol instead of taking responsibility, in our conversation, she threatened to demand full custody of the child. Annoyed, I expressed disinterest in anything not biologically mine, allowing her to keep the child while I would keep our 2 dogs. She attempted to convince me to co-parent, asserting that I am the child's father. In anger, I exploded, yelling at her to go and take her child with her, referring to him as a fool. A week has passed since the incident. I am at home, which is in my name as a gift from my parents. She went to her parents' house with the child and has not contacted me since. My parents support my decision, and my dad believes I did the right thing by not raising someone not of my blood. I am currently seeing a therapist 3 times a week who assures me that leaving behind what causes me pain is the first step. Emotional turmoil persists. Writing here for distraction was suggested by my younger brother. My sister-in-law disclosed everything out of guilt, seeing me happy with my son while knowing he might not be mine. The revelation occurred during a moment of weakness when we visited her, causing her to break down with guilt. I harbor tremendous hatred for my wife and conflicting feelings of pain and resentment towards the child. Despite this, I am determined to move forward. I hope the divorce proceeds smoothly since we have separate finances and properties. If she seeks child support, I have proof of the child's paternity, which, according to my lawyer, should suffice in any legal process. My therapist advises against seeing either the child or my wife, emphasizing the importance of focusing on my well-being first. The child is no longer my responsibility, and accepting this reality is crucial for my emotional recovery. Update: not much of significance has occurred, but here's a brief summary. About 3 days after my post, my ex visited my house and requested entry. I went out to meet her at the door, stating firmly that she wouldn't set foot in my house while I'm present. If she had anything to say, it should be at the door. She practically begged me to take her son back, acknowledging that cutting off all contact was my prerogative. She expressed that she deserved it, but raising a child alone would jeopardize her dream of becoming a notary. Working in public record, she's 2 years away from pursuing a vacancy in the judiciary to achieve her notary goal. I tried to explain calmly that my therapist recommended cutting off all contact with both of them, asking her to leave before I lose my composure. Despite my love for the child, I won't direct my anger at an innocent, especially one born out of her actions. I expressed this with some anger but never raised my voice, since we were on the street, emphasizing that the child deserves better and she is currently responsible for providing that. Afterward, we talked a bit more. She resisted the urge to cry or make a scene, considering we were on the street and she values others' opinions. The last thing she asked was to at least let her see the dogs. I declined, believing it's best for them to get used to her absence, as seeing her after so much time would only make them euphoric. After that, she nodded and left. 2 days later, she called me upon receiving the divorce papers. My mistake was answering, and after about 30 minutes of yelling, I directed her to contact my civil lawyer for any questions. I then silenced her number. She hasn't come to my house or tried to call again. On the same day, I contacted a friend from my master's program and suggested going out. She accepted, and we've been going out since then. Finally, last Friday, I proposed being an exclusive couple, which she accepted. She has stayed overnight at my house for a few days already, familiar with and adoring my dogs. I appreciate this since I couldn't start something with someone who doesn't accept my pets. We are currently taking things easy. She understands the drama I am having with my ex and the child, respecting my decision. She asked if I will ever have contact with the child again. I told her maybe when he is of age to understand my decisions, but I don't expect it to interfere with my life in the future. She nodded, glad that I prioritized myself during this process. Maybe. This took a little longer than I expected, but this is the summary of what happened these days, and well, final update to put it plainly, I'm now officially divorced. In my country, there's a streamlined divorce process known as a quick divorce, applicable when there are no shared assets, joint finances, or children involved. This type of divorce takes place at the municipal level, bypassing the judicial proceedings that typically include reconciliation, asset distribution, and more. As you might have guessed, the sole complication was our shared son. The matter of the paternity test arose, confirming that the child isn't mine and my name was successfully removed from his birth certificate, leaving him with both of his mother's last names. Describing the divorce process as challenging is an understatement. My ex-wife attempted multiple times to exploit our child's mental state to lure me back, but recollecting everything that transpired helped me stay focused. Gratitude is due to my current partner, who consistently supported me. While I understand it's not my fault, hearing it from her also played a role in helping me. After numerous discussions involving our lawyers, I proposed covering half of a nanny's salary for her son while she gets her life back on track. Fortunately, she agreed to cover the remaining expenses entirely on her own. I made it clear that I wouldn't be taking care of her son, and she agreed. Being devoted to her work, adapting to single motherhood seems to have been a significant shock for her. Out of curiosity, I asked if she spoke with the child's father. She tried, and he even lived with them for 2 weeks at her parents' house, but they simply had nothing in common, leading to conflicts. She had to intervene to prevent them from shouting at each other, and after a couple of weeks, he left. While somewhat sad, she is a woman with a good job and figure with a year of nanny assistance. She has ample time to find a suitable stepfather for her son. Meanwhile, I don't plan to talk to him yet, perhaps in a couple of years or when he's a teenager. If the child doesn't wish to talk to me, I won't insist, understanding if he harbors resentment. Discussing the child led to her expressing hatred towards me, particularly for having a new partner. Quickly, I found it rude, especially since my current partner was present, and I had to intervene in an argument between the two. Despite signing the divorce papers and acknowledging my help, she couldn't bear that throughout the conversation I maintained a compassionate demeanor. She has always been proud, achieving everything through her merit, and my look seemed to hurt and anger her. I clarified that it was the same look as always if she has a paranoia problem. It's not my concern. The important thing is, she signed the papers, and I can finally move on with my life. For a year, I'll be paying half the minimum wage for a nanny a fair price for peace. Despite harboring negative feelings, I accepted it and moved forward. This month, yes, I still resent her, but not enough to express it directly or wish her ill. She has enough problems to deal with. I appreciate my current partner for enduring all this. More than once, I told her she didn't have to accompany me or worry about it. But she insists that my problems are hers too, and that I shouldn't carry the burden alone. It has been a tremendous help in lightening my load. She also understands my reluctance to rush into marriage this year or possibly the next, and I appreciate her understanding. At least this chapter of my life is about to close without long-term consequences for me. Third story: married for 16 years, together for 20, and parents of 3 children. I uncovered her affair by hacking her phone and reading messages. She engaged in an affair with a coworker, terminated it, and attempted to repair our marriage, but it was unsuccessful. I filed for divorce in October 2018. She moved out in November 2018 and promptly resumed her relationship with her affair partner. Our divorce was finalized in December 2019, and she remained with her affair partner until last week. Tearfully, my ex called, asking if I could take the kids overnight. Concerned, I inquired about what was wrong. She replied that karma had struck her hard. Sensing something awry, she went through her affair partner's phone while he was in the shower, discovering an extensive string of explicit Facebook messages, akin to how I discovered her affair. My ex he is, and his new affair partner is a married year-old. Now, don't get me wrong, he initially wanted to celebrate this turn of events. From the beginning, I warned her that the guy was a predator. However, after hearing her out, I realized she was genuinely in love with him, and part of me felt sorry for her. Ironically, she apologized more on that day than ever before for the pain she caused me, expressing remorse for the hurt I endured. Taking it with a grain of salt, I've moved on and found happiness with someone else over the last 6 months. Update: there was nearly a second instance of infidelity with the affair partner AP, but my ex caught him before they could arrange a meeting. She has complete control over his phone, monitoring all his apps and checking his messages constantly. It sounds like a nightmare to me. My ex and the AP still have a peculiar on and off relationship. Let me delve into that a bit. Officially, they are not together. According to her, both of their Facebook pages are listed as single. She occasionally wears his engagement ring, and I'm pretty sure she would return it. Unlike her refusal with my $12,000 wedding ring. She stays at his apartment occasionally but claims they just hang out as friends. Why? Because don't we all spend the night at our ex's place, sleep in their bed, and just hang out? I'm still amused that she thinks everyone is naive like that. Meanwhile, she had to change jobs because of her close friendship with the plant manager at her previous workplace. They were always talking, going to lunch, taking Harley rides, walks on breaks, etc. Rumors started flying, and things got messy there. Her work friend is married with 3 kids. He still visits her on occasion and takes her on a Harley ride to a movie or whatever. She was apparently caught by our teenage son kissing someone in the driveway. Our son didn't know who this person was and called me to ask. I told him to ask his mother who that was and played dumb. He was under the impression that she and the AP were still together because he was just over the day before, grilling out and mowing her lawn. Another new guy appears. She won't disclose how or where she met him. They went on 2 dates and she didn't seem into him. They knew each other from a previous job, and he kept saying how he wanted to be with all her friends and co-workers back in the day. We were talking the other day about retirement. She knows my plan is to semi-retire in 6 years, as soon as I'm done with child support and all of my kids are 18. I plan to relocate south to a warmer climate. She gave me a sob story about how she had to raise all of our children while I built a business, and how she'll probably have to work till she's dead and never retire. That is so far from the truth. I put in just as much time, housework, and effort into our family as she did. For a few years, I did even more than her while she was out partying with her friends 4 or 5 nights a week. My response to her was, "You made your choice to leave me and go with your AP." Her facial response was glorious to see. I was her retirement plan. She now has a whopping $14,000 in her 401k for retirement, and she is in her early 42nds. Even if she stays or goes back or whatever she is doing with her AP, he makes okay money, has no savings, little retirement, and doesn't have a pot to piss in or a window to throw it out of. So there is some karma in that. My thought to pass on to all of you going through a divorce or on the verge of one is this. My life was torn apart from October 2018 to December 2019 when our divorce was final. Fast forward a few years to now and I'm happier than I have ever been. I am looking to retire early and enjoy some beach time. My relationship with my kids has never been stronger or better. When things look so dark and terrible, be a good person. Don't lie or deceive. Don't try to be malicious or involve the kids between you and him or her. Keep your head up and keep walking. The farther you can walk away from the darkness, the better your life will be. Stay strong, my friends. You got this.
Story 2.
My own sister testified against me in court, siding with my cheating ex-wife to force me into paying child support for a child that isn't even mine. I will start by admitting honestly that I hate my sister, though it wasn't always like this. Nina is my oldest sister, and I admired her a lot when we were growing up, but over time, she has shown me what a terrible sister she can be. You see, I was married to my ex-wife, Susie, for 2 years before I discovered she had been cheating on me. The revelation came as a complete shock. I still remember the moment vividly. I was reading through her messages and stumbled upon a conversation where she had been sexting with her male best friend of 8 years. Susie had always assured me that he was just a friend, someone who had been in her life forever. Despite feeling pangs of jealousy at times, I trusted her deeply. We had built our relationship on that trust, so when I accidentally saw those lewd text messages between them, I felt utterly blindsided. It was as if the foundation of everything I believed about our marriage had crumbled in an instant. I confronted her and she immediately broke down, apologizing profusely. She insisted it was just a one-time mistake and that her friend meant nothing to her in that way. She promised to block him and assured me it would never happen again. Despite my anger and hurt, I wanted to believe her. We started going for marriage counseling because I was deeply wounded by her betrayal, and I needed to understand why it happened and if our marriage could be salvaged. In counseling, Susie seemed genuinely remorseful. She took responsibility for her actions and worked hard to regain my trust. For a while, it felt like we were making real progress. She was attentive, transparent, and willing to put in the effort to mend our relationship. I decided to stay and give our marriage another chance because I still loved her, and I wanted to believe that people could change and relationships could heal. However, as you might have already guessed, it was a huge mistake. After a while, I found out my ex-wife was trying to secretly meet up with her male best friend. One evening, she had told me earlier that she was going to be out with a coworker, but something in her behavior seemed odd, and I had a nagging feeling she was lying. Trusting my gut, I decided to call the coworker after Susie left, just to check with them. To my dismay, they told me that they had no such plans with Susie. I felt a wave of devastation and confusion wash over me. It was becoming painfully clear that Susie was probably meeting up with this guy, otherwise she had no reason to lie to me. My mind raced with thoughts of betrayal. I tried calling her multiple times, but she ignored every call. I felt a growing sense of dread and helplessness as the hours ticked by that night. She finally came home very late, completely drunk. I had been waiting for her all evening, sitting on the couch in our living room, my mind a whirlwind of emotions. When she walked through the door, she didn't even acknowledge me, as she looked completely drunk. She just stumbled past me on her way to the bedroom, acting as if I didn't exist. I sat there feeling invisible and utterly heartbroken, realizing that the woman I once trusted and loved had become a stranger to me. Later, when I was about to go to sleep, I heard her phone buzz on the bedside table with a message notification. Susie had fallen asleep fully dressed in her clothes from the evening, clearly too drunk to even change. I gently covered her with a blanket and, driven by a mix of dread and curiosity, leaned over to check the message she had received. As soon as I saw the number, I recognized it instantly. It belonged to him, her male friend. My heart sank as I read the text. That was so much fun. We should do this more often. The message ended with a tongue and a sweat drop emoji, which only made things worse. I felt a wave of nausea hit me. There was no way a guy would send a message like that with those emojis if it didn't mean something significant had happened between them. My mind raced with all sorts of terrible thoughts about what they might have done. I felt sick to my stomach, realizing that my worst fears were likely true. I tried to calm myself, but it was impossible. The betrayal felt like a physical pain in my chest, and I couldn't shake the image of them together. I couldn't sleep at all that night. I tossed and turned in bed, my mind consumed by anxiety and heartbreak. I kept replaying everything in my head, wondering how it had come to this and what I was supposed to do next. The night felt endless, and by the time morning came, I knew that nothing would ever be the same. When I confronted Susie about that night and how she had lied, she did everything she could to avoid taking responsibility. At first, she tried to manipulate and gaslight me, claiming that my lack of trust was the real issue and that calling her coworker was an invasion of her privacy. She accused me of being paranoid and unreasonable. Her attempts to gaslight me were frustrating and hurtful, but I refused to back down. I brought up the message he had sent, demanding an explanation. She brushed it off, insisting that's just how friends talk to each other, and called me a weirdo for reading too much into it. Her dismissive attitude only fueled my determination to get to the truth. I decided to play my last card. I told her I would confront him directly if she didn't come clean to me. This threat seemed to strike a nerve. She became visibly anxious and tried to dissuade me from contacting him, clearly worried about the consequences. Finally, after much resistance and reluctance, Susie broke down and confessed. She admitted that she had been wanting to see him for a long time and that they had indeed made out after getting drunk. Her confession was like a punch to the gut, confirming my worst fears and shattering any remaining trust I had in her. She continued to justify her actions, suggesting that our marriage had become dull and that she was seeking excitement elsewhere. I vehemently disagreed, pointing out that her cheating and deceit were the very reasons our marriage had soured. I reminded her that it was impossible to return to normalcy after discovering she was sexting with another man. Despite her attempts to rationalize her behavior, I stood my ground firmly. I made it clear that the blame lay squarely on her shoulders for breaking our vows and destroying the trust we had built. I expressed my deep disappointment and told her that I had reached my breaking point. I couldn't simply overlook her actions and pretend everything was okay. Susie, realizing the gravity of the situation, began pleading for forgiveness. She acknowledged her issues but begged me not to abandon her, emphasizing that she was willing to work on herself and our relationship. Despite her promises, I realized that the trust between us had forever been shattered. The damage was too deep now, and eventually, I realized that staying was only going to prolong the inevitable. Her betrayal had created a rift that we couldn't bridge, and our marriage had been irreparably damaged. After realizing this, I had to make the hardest decision of my life by asking her to move out of my house. Fortunately, we had a prenuptial agreement in place, so I was relieved that it was going to protect me from any potential financial repercussions during our divorce. Despite her insistence and attempts to involve her friends to persuade me to forgive her, I stood firm in my decision and ultimately kicked her out to the streets. I know this might sound harsh to read, but I was in too much pain since I always thought that we would grow old together. However, her betrayal left me shattered, and I knew I would never be the same again. I confided in my parents and my older sister Nina about what had transpired between me and Susie. They were shocked, dismayed by the news, as no one had anticipated Susie's actions and assured me of their support to divorce her, which provided me with some comfort. However, Nina seemed unusually quiet throughout all this, which struck me as odd. When I asked her for her thoughts, considering her close relationship with Susie during our marriage, she responded in an unexpected way. Instead of acknowledging my feelings of betrayal caused by Susie's actions, Nina questioned whether I was certain about divorcing Susie, pointing out that unlike me, Susie didn't have any family support. I was taken aback by Nina's response. It seemed like she was more concerned about Susie's well-being than she was about the emotional turmoil I was going through. I responded firmly to Nina, stating that I didn't care about Susie's support system because she had chosen to betray me repeatedly through her infidelity. I emphasized that Susie's well-being was no longer my concern, and I questioned why she seemed more concerned about my ex-wife than about me, her own brother. Nina defended herself, explaining that she was simply worried about me and didn't want me to make any hasty decisions about my marriage without thinking about it. She expressed how she had always believed Susie and I were meant for each other and that she was still in shock about our divorce. Hence, she wanted to know if I would have any regrets down the line. While I found her response to be strange at the time, I didn't dwell on it too much. Afterward, the entire situation was already emotionally draining, so I tried to be more focused on getting through my divorce first. In the beginning, everything seemed to be going well for me during the divorce proceedings, and my lawyer was confident that we would win the case. But then, everything changed. Susie dropped a bombshell. She was pregnant. I was completely blindsided by this revelation. It was something I hadn't seen coming at all. Clearly, life had different plans for me and wanted to hurt me more. After this news, Susie and her lawyer urged me to halt the divorce proceeding. They argued that we should try to work things out for the sake of our child. Susie insisted that she wanted to provide our child with a traditional family upbringing. I was taken aback and immediately pushed back, stating that I didn't care about her wishes anymore and that there was no way this child could be mine. Susie's response was to argue back that she had never been intimate with anyone else other than me. She emphasized that just because she had made out with her male best friend that night didn't mean she could get pregnant from him. She continued to urge me to consider what was best for our child and to fight for our marriage for the baby's sake. However, I refused to be swayed. I knew this was a desperate attempt to derail the divorce proceedings and guilt-trip me into staying with her so that she could continue to live a lavish life with my money. It was clear to me that Susie was grasping at straws, and I remained resolute in my decision to end the marriage. I stood firm, insisting that the divorce would proceed as planned. I stated that after Susie gave birth, I would arrange for a paternity test to determine if the child was mine or not. However, Susie's lawyer countered our argument, claiming that since Susie was still legally married to me and had stated that she hadn't been intimate with anyone else, it automatically made me the father of the child. They asserted that they would seek child support from me. Due to this, my lawyer vehemently disagreed, pointing out that without a paternity test, such claims were baseless. Unfortunately, we are all too aware of the shortcomings in our legal system, especially when it comes to protecting men in situations like these. In the following weeks, Susie's lawyer proceeded to sue me for child support, presenting evidence to support their claim that Susie had not been intimate with anyone else. They portrayed me as a controlling freak who was trying to get away from paying child support and taking any responsibility for my actions. They even brought in witnesses to testify on Susie's behalf. To my shock, among the witnesses was my oldest sister, Nina. I had no idea that she would even be there. Initially, I assumed she was there just to observe and support me, but to my dismay, she testified against me, stating that she had been friends with Susie for a long time and was certain that Susie couldn't have possibly betrayed me by actually sleeping with someone else since, according to my sister, Susie was still in love with me. Nina firmly stated that she believed the child belonged to me. Hearing my own sister support my ex-wife over me was heartbreaking. Nina knew firsthand how much I had loved Susie and how deeply she had hurt me, yet she was there supporting Susie's deceitful actions. Later, when we were out of court, I confronted my sister about her unexpected testimony. I expressed my shock and betrayal, feeling completely blindsided by her actions. Nina, however, stood by her decision, insisting that she was doing what she believed was right and that I would eventually appreciate her stance in the future. I raised my voice, expressing my disgust and anger at her for putting me in a situation where I might have to pay child support for a child whose paternity wasn't even confirmed. Nina countered by arguing that I shouldn't be so cruel to an unborn child and that I needed to consider the financial difficulties Susie would face without any alimony and child support from me. Nina told me that I would never understand her perspective because I didn't possess maternal instincts like women did. She urged me to realize that providing for the child's expenses was the least I could do in this situation. I felt exploited and deeply unsettled by my sister's perspective on the matter. I couldn't comprehend how she could prioritize Susie's financial needs over the emotional turmoil I was going through. My parents also expressed their disappointment in my sister, telling Nina that she had no right to go behind my back and testify against me. However, the damage had already been done. Since my own sister testifying against me proved to the court that Susie might be telling the truth and that I was trying to escape responsibility for our child, the court ruled in favor of my ex-wife, granting her child support from me until the child turned 18. I was filled with rage and refused to accept the judgment, but despite our efforts, my lawyer and I found ourselves unheard and unable to sway the court's decision. It has been quite a while now since my divorce with Susie, and I've continued to pay child support for her son every month, who clearly doesn't resemble me in any way. Despite conducting a paternity test that confirms he isn't mine, the fact remains that because my ex-wife was pregnant while we were still married, the child is legally my responsibility. I'm now compelled to keep paying until he reaches the age of 18. This is why, throughout this ordeal, my resentment towards my sister has deepened even more than towards my ex-wife. I solely blame Nina for making me trapped in this situation. This is why I've maintained complete silence towards my sister and refused to acknowledge her presence at my events. Despite multiple pleas from my parents to forgive her and let the matter go, everyone else in the family respects and understands my stance. Several cousins and relatives share my disdain towards Nina, and as a result, they also keep their distance from her. Nina, on multiple occasions, has complained to our parents about how I've isolated her from the rest of the family. She justifies her actions by claiming that she did what she thought was best for the child. However, her attempts to garner sympathy have continued to fall on deaf ears. As the rest of the family recognizes her foolishness and stands by my decision, Nina got married last year to her longtime boyfriend Joshua. Despite receiving an invitation to the wedding, I didn't bother to attend. I later learned from my parents that many other family members also didn't attend, which disappointed Nina. After marriage, she and her husband were trying to get pregnant for a while. My parents had expressed their excitement to me about the prospect of finally having a grandchild from our bloodline. Recently, I had to travel to a nearby town for a work conference hosted by my company. After the conference concluded, my CO workers and I decided to unwind and relax at the hotel bar during our free time. Imagine my surprise when I spotted my sister sitting with an older gentleman at the bar. She hadn't noticed me, and I made sure to keep it that way, as I was curious about her presence in a bar late at night out of town. Considering she was married, I observed as she leaned in closer to the older gentleman and whispered something in his ear that made him laugh. My suspicions grew as they appeared to be flirting and seemed unusually comfortable with each other. Without giving it too much thought, I instinctively reached for my phone and quietly snapped a few pictures. I made sure to capture clear shots of my sister's face and the older gentleman's face, wanting undeniable proof of what I was witnessing. As I observed them together at the bar, my mind raced with disbelief and confusion. How could my sister, who was married, be in such a compromising situation? I watched in disbelief as Nina and the man continued to engage in their intimate conversation, sharing smiles and laughter. After about an hour, the man gestured for Nina to accompany him to his room, and she nodded at him and got up to accompany him. My eyes widened as the reality of the situation sank in. I was clearly witnessing my sister about to cheat on her husband. I wanted to yell at her to stop, but from my past experience, I had learned that cheaters never learn from their mistakes. Instead, they need to be taught a lesson. After I returned home, I made the decision to directly reach out to her husband, Joshua. I felt it was important for him to know the truth rather than be blindsided like I was. I found him on Facebook and sent him a friend request, hoping he would accept it. After a few hours, I checked and saw that he had indeed accepted my request, so I immediately messaged him. In the message, I introduced myself as Nina's brother and explained that we needed to have an important conversation. I asked him not to inform my sister about my text to him and provided him with my phone number so he could call me. I hoped he would listen to what I had to say and waited anxiously for his call. A few minutes later, he called me, curious about why I had reached out. He mentioned that he already knew about me from Nina and my parents, but was surprised that I had contacted him after all this time. I apologized to him for not attending their wedding and expressed my regret that we were talking under such circumstances. He then asked me what was wrong, and I truthfully shared what I had seen in the hotel between Nina and the older gentleman. I refrained from immediately using the word cheating as I wasn't entirely sure if Nina and he had an open marriage or not, so I didn't want to make assumptions. However, as I detailed the events to Joshua, he began probing with numerous questions about what Nina was wearing and who the other man was, showing clear distress. To support my account, I mentioned that I had even taken photographs of her with the gentleman, as I found it difficult to believe myself. I promptly shared those images with him to provide concrete evidence of what I had witnessed. It was apparent that he was deeply affected by the revelation of Nina's infidelity, and was grappling with the gravity of the situation. After a brief pause, he unexpectedly expressed gratitude for my honesty and questioned why I would go out of my way to help him, especially considering we were essentially strangers, and I no longer had a relationship with Nina. His question struck a chord and prompted me to share my own experience, explaining how I had been in his position when my ex-wife cheated on me. As I delved into the details, I elaborated on how Nina had added to my pain by testifying against me, leading to my current burden of paying child support for a child who wasn't even mine. Joshua was quiet for a few minutes after hearing my story. He then revealed that Nina had portrayed a completely different version of the truth to him. According to her, Susie and my marriage were already failing, and we had stopped being intimate, leading Susie to make a one-time mistake that supposedly led to our divorce. I was livid upon hearing this distortion of reality and clarified to Joshua that Susie had, in fact, cheated on me twice, making it clear to him that our divorce was not solely due to a one-time mistake, but that she had repeatedly broken my trust with her. Male friend. To my relief, Joshua believed me and appreciated my honesty in shedding light on my sister's deceitful behavior. He informed me that he had no intention of staying with a cheating partner either, and would be having a talk with Nina regarding this. In the days that followed, my parents repeatedly called me to accuse me of ruining Nina's life, as she was now facing a divorce. They blamed me for interfering unnecessarily in her marriage, and expressed their frustration about not being able to have a grandchild from her. After this, I didn't hold back in the argument either. I countered their accusations, stating that it wasn't my fault their daughter was not faithful in her marriage. I emphasized that instead of fixating on the idea of a grandchild, they should focus on teaching my sister better values and morals so she could become a better person. Nina also sent me a vile text, accusing me of being a spiteful little boy who couldn't keep my nose out of others' business. She even went on to insinuate that Susie's infidelity during my marriage was somehow justified, and that I deserved everything that had happened to me. Her message left me seething with anger. It took me hours to calm myself down after reading her words. However, fate seemed to have its own way of balancing things because I recently learned that Nina is apparently pregnant. She claims Joshua is the father, but he's refusing to take any responsibility. Joshua has reached out to me, requesting me to testify for him when the matter inevitably goes to court, since I was the one who had taken those incriminating pictures of Nina with the other man. I have agreed without any hesitation, not just so I can seek revenge on my sister, but also out of empathy for Joshua. I don't want another man to endure the pain and betrayal that I experienced with my ex-wife. Since then, my parents and Nina have been relentlessly pressuring me not to testify for Joshua. They keep emphasizing that family comes before anyone. I can't help but find their messages ironic, considering Nina didn't prioritize family when it came to me. Am I the asshole for teaching my sister a lesson and making sure her husband doesn't suffer the same fate as me? Update 1. I am surprised to see how polarized everyone's reaction is to my post. I can't believe that there are a few women under my post trying to convince me to support my sister even though she is clearly cheated. I would just like to say to them, shame on you. Believe me, I would have had absolutely no issues if my ex-wife had asked for child support after proving to me that the child was mine. However, she didn't. She clearly knew that the child wasn't mine since we were not even intimate at that time. Hence, she knowingly forced me to be liable for it as she couldn't afford it on her own. I couldn't prove that she had intimate relations with that other guy because there was no proof other than that one text I had found. Hence, I do hate my sister Nina for screwing me over and testifying for my ex-wife. However, now that Nina is similarly manipulating her husband, I won't stand by it. I'm going to testify against her and make sure that Joshua doesn't suffer the same fate. In the future, if it does come out that the child belongs to Joshua after he or she is born, I'm sure he will have no problem stepping up because he seems like a nice guy. But until that is proven, why should a husband be forced to pay child support when the wife has been clearly sleeping around with other guys? Nina has shown absolutely no remorse about her affair or for being the cause of her marriage falling apart. Unlike my marriage, Joshua and Nina don't even have a prenup, which means there's a possibility he might have to pay her alimony. Hence, I believe on top of this, he shouldn't be forced to pay child support for a child who isn't his. I believe I am doing the right thing, and I'm glad that the overall majority of the comments under my post agree with my decision. Update 2. It's been a while since I updated anything here. Today, I provided testimony against my sister in court. I recounted everything I had witnessed her doing with the older man, presenting all the evidence and photos. I could feel my sister's angry gaze fixed on me the whole time, but I remained resolute. Despite her lawyer's attempts to dismiss my testimony by claiming I held a grudge against my sister, the judge upheld its validity. I hope that my testimony will have a positive impact on Joshua's case, and that he won't be compelled to pay child support. However, the outcome remains to be seen. In the midst of everything that's been happening, my relationship with my parents has taken a hit. My mom called me, her voice choked with tears, after she found out I had followed through with my promise to testify against my sister. She was clearly disappointed, and told me how she and Dad were hoping that I wouldn't do such a thing to my sister. As I listened to her, I couldn't help but feel a surge of frustration. I reminded her of how they had never fought for me with such intensity when my sister had done the same thing to me during my divorce. And they had even forgiven her for everything. Yet here she was, calling me a disappointment and crying as if my struggles and burdens were nothing compared to my sister's. I went on to tell my mom that it was unfair for them to scold me for standing up for what's right and telling the truth, especially when they hadn't stood by me in the past. It felt like a betrayal, and I made it clear that I didn't need them or my dad in my life if they were going to prioritize my cheating sister over me in such a manner. Since then, I have stopped talking to my parents and refused to pick up their calls or reply to their messages. Update 3. I'm back with an update on my sister's situation. I'm pleased to report that Joshua was cleared of paying any child support to my sister. I'm sure Nina is very upset. I can't help but feel a sense of satisfaction, knowing that at least one person was able to avoid the unjust burden that so many others, including myself, have had to endure. I would like to clarify a few more things for the last time that people keep asking under my post. No, I don't have a relationship with Susie's son, even though I continue to pay for child support. If the son ever grows up and reaches out to me, I will not hesitate to tell him the truth about his mother. Yes, my parents and I are still not talking to each other, and honestly, I have been feeling much lighter and relaxed without them calling me every other day and accusing me of not supporting my sister. Nina won't dare to confront me, because I'm sure she's still embarrassed after I testified against her. Also, yes, she will be getting alimony from Josh, which we already knew would happen. No, my parents don't have a relationship with Susie's son since they know he isn't my child. I have no idea if they're going to accept Nina's child either, but maybe they will.
Story 3.
Janet and I celebrated 12 years of marriage, having been sweethearts since the age of 10. Opting out of college, I landed an entry-level job as a draftsman at Desmond Engineering right after high school. A year later, we tied the knot, and the following year brought the joy of becoming parents to twin girls, Bethany and Brittany. Despite initial challenges, diligent budgeting helped us through. While still a draftsman, I moved up a few grades, improving our financial situation. We managed to purchase a modest home and owned 2 decent cars. Although not brand new, they were far from outdated. Janet fulfilled her dream of being a housewife, and with our financial stability, she didn't need to work. Both of us remained healthy and fit. Janet had a bit more stature than our wedding day, standing just over 5 feet tall, with dark brown hair and bangs resembling little Marie Osmond. Personally, my physique hadn't changed much since my high school football days as the right tackle. Billy Martin moved to Reading from Lancaster about a year ago and took a job with Desmond Engineering as a surveyor. Billy and I played football against each other and immediately became friends. He also married his high school sweetheart, a redhead named Sarah. Sarah and Janet became instant friends. They didn't have children yet, but they were ideal nannies. When we weren't at work, Billy and I enjoyed each other's company. It was a pleasant breakaway from family life. Of course, Janet and Sarah did the same. They went shopping together, attended parties and club meetings, and Billy and I watched the girls on TV. Sarah also took a job as a secretary at Gilbert Engineering, located just outside the city. About 6 months ago, I began noticing changes. Previously, the PTA meeting was held once a month, but now it is once a week. Sarah, despite not having children, always visited Janet. The frequency of Tupperware and Magic Chef parties seemed to increase every month, yet they never made purchases. They joined a book club, but never found time to read. On weekends, they spent hours shopping, buying very little. Janet's collection of fashionable lingerie grew, but I never got to enjoy any of it. It started bothering me. I never mentioned anything to Billy because he didn't seem to care. I didn't want to cause problems if something happened. About an hour after putting the girls to bed, Janet came home from some kind of basket party. She took a shower before Sarah picked her up and took another as soon as she got home. This seemed strange to me. While she was in the shower, I quickly checked the basket and found a set of black lace lingerie. Who would wear black lace lingerie to a basket party? I'm not in the habit of checking my wife's underwear, but I did this tonight and found that the underwear were wet and sticky. I put them in my pocket. Until tonight, I had never once delved into my wife's purse or wallet. The only thing I was really interested in was her cell phone. Apparently, she was pretty sure I wouldn't spy because she hadn't deleted a single call in the last week. The majority of calls were addressed to Sarah, but a large number of incoming and outgoing calls were addressed to KC, KH, and KW. Of course, I had no idea who they were, but I quickly realized that the C stood for cell, the H stood for home, and the W probably stood for work. I checked her address book, and Sarah also had 3 numbers listed: Sarah S., Sarah H., and Sarah W. I was amazed at how well organized my wife's phone was. Looking at Sarah's work number, I noticed that it had an extension. Checking KW's number, I found it was the same number as Sarah, but with a different extension. It wasn't hard to guess that Janet was calling and receiving calls from someone who worked with Sarah. It was also easy to guess that Sarah must have been the one who introduced Janet, and the mysterious company, K. Gilbert Engineering, was now closed. I took Janet's phone and dialed KW's number. Upon approaching Ken Sanders' desk, I heard a recorded message stating that he wasn't available at the moment. The message suggested leaving a name and phone number for a callback. After the signal, I ended the call, finding it too easy. Janet poked her head around the doorway and inquired if I was going to bed. I responded that I was almost done with the book and would get up once finished, acknowledging the possibility of falling asleep on the sofa. It was my intention to sleep on the couch. It was a restless night. I kept trying to figure out what I did wrong or what I could have done differently. It was a terrible waste of time and mental effort. Every time I redirected my thoughts to what I should do, they kept coming back to what I should do. I kept looking at the clock and it didn't move. All I knew for sure was that I was not going to take any blame for what happened or what was going to happen. I woke up to the sounds of my 2 little angels cooking breakfast. Janet encouraged them to take care of themselves rather than wait. The idea was good, and it appeared to be effective. While stretching and scratching myself, my wife entered the room and mentioned that I should hurry up or I'd be late for work. I assured her it wasn't a problem as I wasn't going to work that day. When she questioned why, I explained it was due to too many personal problems. With a yawn, I headed towards the bathroom, realizing I needed a shower. Upon my return, Janet seemed a bit puzzled as the girls had already left for school. I grabbed a cup of coffee and sat at the table opposite my wife, who looked at me hesitantly, as if anticipating something but uncertain about what. I straightforwardly requested her to share details about her novel, sensing she might not readily open up and share her thoughts. In response, she asked if my downcast mood was due to suspicions of her being unfaithful. I confirmed my concerns and pressed her to discuss the novel. Despite being married for 12 years, she questioned why I would entertain such thoughts. I insisted on discussing her novel, citing my work commitments for the day and a refusal to engage in games. My wife, with affection, let out an exasperated sigh and leaned in, reassuring me that there was no romance in her novel. I sarcastically acknowledged her honesty, but expressed my inability to appreciate it at the moment. She leaned back, sipping her coffee as if she had taken control of the situation. I then asked if she could answer a few simple questions, to which she agreed. I inquired about her frequent attendance at PTA meetings every week, despite the PTA secretary stating they only held monthly meetings and she hadn't attended one in 6 months. In response, she expressed confusion and a bit less sassiness, claiming she didn't understand what I was implying. I pointed out that she and Sarah attended non-existent PTA meetings every Tuesday and questioned why she would lie about such a matter. Janet took some time to reflect on the question and eventually found an answer. She apologized, explaining that on Tuesday nights, she and Sarah went to Rosie's Cantina for ladies' night to enjoy 2-for-1 margaritas. They hadn't informed me to avoid any misunderstandings, considering Billy and me. She admitted it was a mistake and promised to inform us from now on. I remained skeptical, stating that I would verify her explanation. I suggested Sarah might support her, but I questioned what the people at Rosie's might say. In response, she emphasized that I was making a big deal out of it. She then shifted the focus, asking about my behavior at little Tupperware parties, questioning why I took a shower before leaving and another upon returning home. I explained that it was to eliminate the smell of smoke from my hair, as many women smoked at those gatherings. She continued probing, asking why I wore fancy underwear to those parties, but not for her, unless it was a special occasion. I admitted not having a good answer, stating that I just wanted to feel dressed up when going out. Janet's lies began to irritate me, and I struggled to control my anger, realizing it was time to address the situation. I confronted her with the soiled underwear I found the previous night, accusing her of deception. I expressed my awareness that the substance on the underwear was not mine, and warned her against claiming it was due to a yeast infection. My anger escalated, and I demanded an explanation. Janet fidgeted in her chair, avoiding eye contact, seemingly unable to provide a quick response. Frustrated, I pressed her further, questioning why she had come home with soiled underwear and insisting on an explanation. She urged me to stop and expressed her inability to endure the situation any longer, claiming we had been married for 12 years. She questioned how I could treat her in such a manner. The continuous stream of lies and constant denial overwhelmed me with all the strength I could muster. I hurled my partially filled coffee cup across the room, shattering the front of the microwave. This time, there was no doubt I had Janet's attention. The expression on her face was new, as she had never witnessed my anger before. Leaning over the table, I confronted her loudly, demanding information about Ken Sanders. She rose from the chair and moved towards the sink, trying to evade the conversation, repeatedly stating that he was just a friend. I persisted, asking if she had a close relationship with him. In a terrified tone, she admitted to it. I pressed further, questioning if she had slept with him the previous night. With remorse in her voice, she confirmed it, urging me to stop and expressing sincere apologies. She stood at the sink, sobbing uncontrollably. After pouring myself fresh coffee, I heard Janet's cell phone ringing. Her eyes shifted nervously between me and the phone as she suggested answering it, identifying the caller as Ken. I pressed the speakerphone button and greeted Ken, who sounded distressed, mentioning a call attempt on his work number the previous night. Janet seemed frozen with fear, and I nodded in acknowledgement. She hesitated in responding to Ken's inquiries about her presence and whether something was wrong, eventually admitting that I was present and aware of their situation. I intervened, addressing Ken and informing him that I had some matters to attend to in the morning, but promised to visit him in the afternoon. I suggested having emergency on speed dial. Ken didn't hang up but remained silent. Ending the call, I returned the phone to my pocket. Janet, now in her robe, stood at the sink, trembling. Expressing my intention to leave, I posed one final question about the name of the guy Sarah was dating. She reacted by pleading with me not to ask. In her distress, she threw the second cup across the room, causing it to crash against the tiled wall behind the sink. In a hurried manner, she provided the name as Kelvin, specifically mentioning Calvin Bostic. She informed me of her return later in the afternoon and instructed me to clear out my belongings before then. She mentioned her mother staying with the girls temporarily and assured assistance in retrieving any items I couldn't fit in my car. She emphasized not to contact her and requested informing her mother of my whereabouts. She remained still, offering no further words as I walked out the door. Of course, I had no idea what to do next. I decided to go into the office and see Billy. I considered him a friend and believed he should know what was happening. It was easy to deduce that Sarah met Calvin at work and became friends with him. Ken was likely Calvin's friend in need of a date. I might have simplified this a bit, but I thought it was close enough. Billy was absent from the office, probably engaged in some form of betting or similar activities. I called him on his cell phone and shared the distressing news about Janet and Sarah having boyfriends, revealing that the supposed meetings and Tupperware parties were actually social gatherings. He questioned the credibility of the information and found it hard to believe. I suggested asking Sarah about a guy named Calvin Bostic, who worked with her and Gilbert, as I suspected she might have introduced Janet to someone from their workplace. Billy expressed disbelief upon learning about Calvin Bostic, as they had graduated together. I also mentioned a guy named Ken Sanders, describing him as a tall, skinny individual. I shared my belief that Janet would likely warn Sarah soon, as she had given me various excuses before finally confessing. After our conversation, I went to HR to request a short leave, finding it impossible to focus on work. It took only 10 minutes to transfer my tasks to another draftsman. Meanwhile, Janet's cell phone rang, displaying Sarah's name on the caller ID. I answered the call, pretending to be Janet, and inquired about the situation. Sarah apologized, thinking she was calling Janet, and mentioned that Billy had received information at the office. Expressing my anger and disgust, I asked Sarah to clarify what someone had said to Billy. She revealed that she intended to take Janet home and suggested that bothering Janet at that moment was not ideal, as she was busy packing her belongings. Surprised by this revelation, I questioned the reason for packing and learned that Janet planned to return to live with her parents temporarily. Enjoying the pause on the other end of the line, I smiled, imagining the scenarios running through Sarah's mind. In response, I advised her to inform Calvin about Billy's impending arrival, implying that he might appreciate a head start. Sarah reacted with shock and disbelief, exclaiming, "No, God, no," before hanging up. This woman's nerves. We only had one credit card, so canceling it was no problem. We also had an ATM or a debit card. It took me 5 minutes to change the PIN number. I had no idea what to do with the checking account, so I just ignored it for now. In any case, I needed it to pay utilities and other bills. I just hoped Janet didn't take any receipts with her. The cell phone rang again, but this time, it was my phone. Billy chased Calvin Bostic out of the Gilbert building and caught him in the parking lot. He was in jail and wanted me to tell his brother from Lancaster to come and post bail for him. I called his brother. There was nothing more I could do for Billy, so after lunch, I went to Taco Bell. I visited my mom and dad, explaining everything to them. Mom was more than willing to watch the girls for a while. She stayed with me during the week, and the twins stayed with them on the weekends. Now it's time to visit Ken Sanders. The guys in Gilbert's drafting department were eager to tell me about Billy's visit that morning. The drafting department overlooks the parking lot, and they saw everything that happened. Billy caught Calvin before he could get to his BMW. He threw him over the hood of one of the cars and started smashing his face. The guards followed them and tried unsuccessfully to get Billy out. Finally, one of them punched Billy in the neck with a stun weapon. He wasn't home yet when they put him in the police car. They had to take Calvin in an ambulance. One of the guys showed me the office where Ken Sanders worked. It was empty. Looks like old Ken quit suddenly this morning. We walked past Sarah's desk. She wasn't there either, but it looked like she was still working there. 10 minutes later, I found out Ken's home address and headed to the parking lot. It was a small ranch with no garage. There was a white Lexus in the driveway with the trunk and back doors open. As I approached the door, Ken Sanders came out with an armful of clothes. He dropped everything and rushed back into the house. As soon as he saw me, I tripped over the things he dropped and managed to see him exit out the back. As I entered, I had to laugh at his reaction. Damn, I wasn't like Billy. I was a good guy. It looked like the kind of place that would be rented fully furnished. That's why he didn't have a truck. In another 10 minutes, he would have finished and left town. I was looking forward to talking to Ken, but I didn't want to chase him. I looked around the room for anything interesting and got a few pleasant surprises. The first thing I picked up was his cell phone. It lay on the table in the living room next to a folder containing his passport and some personal documents. There was a cute little laptop computer on the dining table. I couldn't find anything else, so I packed up the few goodies I had and left. I didn't want to do anything that could be considered criminal, so I resisted the urge to crash his car. This was beautiful. I believe it might be considered a crime to take items from the house, but he left the door open, and anyone could have taken them. Unable to restrain myself entirely, I let the air out of just one of his tires. He'd need to empty the truck to access the spare tire, and I'm sure he'd do it with one eye on the street, searching for me. I'll retrieve it later. He got the message. I went to the prison to see Billy. His brother and he were occupied with legal matters, so I just waved and smiled at him. It seemed he had everything under control. Mom was already at home and dinner had started. We chatted briefly, and then I brought the things I bought from Ken into the office where my computer and belongings were kept. Before I could examine them closely, Beth and Britt returned from school. I decided it would be best to inform them about what was happening before they inquired. I didn't get a chance. Bethany eagerly greeted me, questioning why Grandma was present and inquiring about Mom's whereabouts. I explained that Mom and I decided to take a break from each other, and she would be staying with her parents for a while. Brittany seemed pleased with the news, claiming victory in a bet with Bethany. She gloated about winning and explained that their argument revolved around Mom cheating on me. Bethany, however, denied ever mentioning anything about Mom cheating, asserting that they were not naive and knew what was happening. She admitted that Brittany was right and that Mom was indeed cheating on me. Expressing surprise at how I found out, she criticized me for being slow and too trusting. Brittany, in an unusual gesture, placed her hand on my shoulder, attempting to console me. The situation was surreal. A 12-year-old girl trying to comfort her father in the midst of a family crisis. One Saturday, when Mom and Sarah said they were going shopping at King of Prussia, Mom wouldn't let Britt and me go with her. She said it was an adult shopping day, and she would compensate us for it later. When we got to school on Monday, 2 kids said they saw her with a guy in Nobles Grove. We called them liars, but one of the girls had a photo on her cell phone. It seemed pretty trivial. I thought there must be an explanation, but Britt said she was cheating. "Why didn't you tell me anything?" They both just shrugged. A couple of weeks later, Tracy Mercer's parents saw Sarah, Mom, and 2 guys at TGI Fridays in Allentown. They told Tracy about it when they got home. I sat dumbfounded. Thank God Grandma invited us to dinner. We didn't discuss the issue during dinner, and I apologized before the dessert arrived. Luckily, the twins decided to leave the topic for the rest of the night. I felt relieved. I had just started examining Ken's laptop when his cell phone received a text message. The message read, "Daxry 4 Sinaf ULYJ, Dear Ken, sorry for the trouble. Love, Janet." While I'm not the best at texting, I easily deciphered this message. It was sent from Sarah's cell phone, indicating that Sarah and Janet were together. Temptation got the better of me, and I couldn't resist letting Janet know that I had Ken's cell phone by spelling out TAJ. I spent the next couple of hours examining files and folders on Ken's computer. Although I found no emails between Janet and Ken, there were intriguing emails between Ken and some old friends in Lancaster. What I read shocked me, and I certainly didn't appreciate it. Janet and I had been together for almost our entire lives, and now I discovered that I never really knew her. In less than a year, she seemed to have become closer to Ken than she had with me in almost 20 years. As I replaced the cartridge in the printer, I noticed tears streaming down my face. This wasn't my usual reaction. Her deception had hurt me, and now I felt the salt in the wounds, perhaps because of my tears. I printed out several emails and a dozen photographs. I would have taken more photos, but I ran out of expensive paper. There were no explicit or suggestive images. All of them were suitable for mixed company. Beth poked her nose in the door and asked if she could call her mother. I didn't feel like I could refuse. My mother was with the twins while they talked to Janet, and she overheard everything. She didn't eavesdrop, but it seemed like the girls weren't trying to hide anything. Mom later told me that they didn't cut Janet any slack and blamed her for the whole problem. The conversation lasted less than 5 minutes. The emails were extremely interesting. Ken applied and got hired as an engineer for an alternative energy project in Spain. His start date was in 6 weeks. Apparently, he didn't inform Gilbert about his departure. I'm sure Sarah knew, but no one else mentioned it. He had all the documents ready for the trip, except for my passport. I'm sure he could find a replacement, but he better hurry if he wants to set a start date. I guess he could always go to the police and report that I stole it, but I didn't think he would do that. He hasn't booked his plane tickets yet. One of the letters to a close friend explained a lot. Janet planned to get a divorce after joining Ken in Spain. She realized that I would never allow her to take the girls out of the country, so she was going to declare me an unfit father. The letter didn't go into detail about how she was going to achieve this, but it did indicate that it would be severe enough to revoke my visitation rights for the twins or custody. It was completely despicable. Ken wrote this letter, so it was all hearsay. I would have liked to have received something original from Janet, but I had to make do with what I had. I printed out several copies of this letter. Mom fell asleep watching Leno, so I sent her to our bedroom. The girls have already gone to bed. I fell asleep on the couch, and there were 4 empty beer bottles on the coffee table. I woke up to the smell of fresh coffee and bacon. Mom always prepared a good breakfast. The girls were finishing their cereal when I approached the table. I had to endure some good-natured teasing before I could start cooking the eggs. The conversation was casual until it was time for the bus. I expressed my concerns to the girls, informing them that their mother might try to separate us by labeling me an unfit parent to retain custody of them. I emphasized my openness to shared custody for their happiness, but clarified that I wouldn't give up my right to be with them. I urged them not to choose sides, but to be cautious and not believe any falsehoods. Brittany assured me that they were smarter than I thought and that they loved Mom but wouldn't let her damage me. She smiled, and Beth gave me a thumbs up before they left. After their departure, Mom refilled my cup and joined me at the table. She encouraged me to relax, assuring me that everyone was on my side. Following a shower and shave, I dressed slightly nicer than usual. Leaving the house with 3 mobile phones felt peculiar, and I made a mental note to purchase the cell phone charger that Ken had given me. Though I probably wouldn't need it, I preferred to be prepared. I checked in at the Family Services office and awaited the caseworker's call. Upon receiving it, I was surprised to recognize the woman who assisted me. Jody Mitchell, whom I hadn't seen in over 10 years, greeted me with a remark about our shared past in high school. She remembered me from those years when she was part of the goth group that stuck together, facing ostracization, particularly from athletes like me. Though she looked normal now, I couldn't forget her pink hair, black lipstick, and dark eye makeup. The sign on her desk read, J. Mitchell, indicating she likely hadn't married. 12 years ago, I could understand it, but today, she looked normal. "John, what can I do for you?" Her question interrupted my train of thought. I stuttered a bit and acknowledged Jody's appearance, to which she chuckled at my awkwardness. I apologized if my words had been embarrassing, and she reassured me to relax. She shared that halfway through college, she realized she could face the world authentically without a false facade. Jody mentioned she had been what I might call normal for almost a decade now, feeling much more comfortable this way. However, she acknowledged sounding patronizing at times and apologized for her difficulty in keeping her foot away from her mouth. Moving on, I asked Jody if there were any files or reports on me. She confirmed there was nothing under my name or Janet's, indicating that it seemed we were providing for our children rather than mistreating them. I affirmed having 12-year-old twin girls, Bethany and Brittany. Shifting the conversation to the main issue, I explained that my wife planned to leave me and take the girls with her. Jody acknowledged the commonality of such situations and inquired if there was a specific reason for her actions. I pointed out that there were no supporting documents or accusations in their records, expressing concerns about potential setups. Jody explained that their computer not showing anything didn't mean I was in the clear. She suggested my wife might be gathering information, like medical records or police reports, before reporting to their office. In response to my skepticism about being set up, Jody clarified that she wasn't saying I couldn't win. She questioned why I thought my wife would take such actions. Despite my initial reluctance, I felt compelled to share an email from Ken. I handed a copy across Jody's desk and inquired about its origin. I explained that I had taken the email from a computer through illegal access, recognizing its inadmissibility for legal purposes. I mentioned the word conspiracy without understanding its legal definition, and expressed my confusion and concern about how to protect myself and my daughters in this situation, especially since I couldn't afford a lawyer. Jody Mitchell relaxed in her chair, and I maintained eye contact without blinking. She rocked back and forth before leaning toward me and suggesting I come back the next morning. I agreed and asked if I could keep the copy of the letter. After receiving confirmation, I left, and she bid farewell, expressing that it was nice to see me. I smiled, and she returned the gesture, revealing a new side of Jody. Lacking connections to lawyers, I resorted to picking one from the phone book. Despite knowing about my wife's intention to divorce me, I wanted to secure my position given the circumstances. I wasn't certain about our financial situation in the coming days, so I paid the lawyer up front in cash for the entire package. I urged him to proceed in the fastest and easiest way, allowing her to have the house as it was worth less than the mortgage. I insisted on joint custody of the twins, with the possibility of taking full custody if feasible, and agreed to pay child support but not alimony. Billy called me while I was on my way to lunch, seeking housing, and I offered to accommodate him. We met at Taco Bell for lunch, and when I approached, Billy had a silly smile on his face. Curious, I inquired about the reason for his happiness. Billy shared that a friend at Community General Hospital had informed him about Calvin. Sarah had visited him at the hospital, unaware of Calvin's wife and children arriving. The situation became chaotic, leading to hospital security escorting Sarah out. Billy walked past Gilbert to talk to her, but found that she was no longer there. I asked about the details of Calvin's family situation, and Billy admitted he didn't know why Calvin's wife didn't live with him or why he didn't go home to his family on weekends. However, he expressed a lack of interest in these details. Billy decided to take a week off from work to sort out his affairs, and we planned to figure out his accommodation since my mother also lived at home. Billy intended to go to his house to gather some clothes and personal belongings in case Sarah wasn't there. He had no intention of talking to her anymore. Later, on my way to see my insurance agent, I received another call from Cameron Wilcox, Janet's father. He requested my presence to help figure things out, mentioning Janet's despair and her unhelpful mother. The meeting would include Cameron, Janet, Janet's sister Carla, and myself. Despite uncertainty about the goals of the meeting, I agreed to be there in about 20 minutes. It was a somber gathering. I brought a folder of evidence and skipped the coffee. Who wants to start? John, Janet believes you're overreacting. She insists you were angry and coerced her into saying untrue things to appease you. According to her, she did nothing wrong, and you have no right to evict her. I sensed that my wife was presenting a highly embellished version of the events to her parents. While I understood her reluctance to admit infidelity, I resented her shifting the blame onto me. Cameron expressed his desire for facts to better understand the situation and questioned what I expected him to do, prove she's a liar, or admit I made a mistake. I explained that Janet claimed not to have a boyfriend, but just shared a few drinks with friends from Sarah's workplace, interpreting it differently. I pointed out that she had over 80 phone conversations with this friend in the last month and asked about the frequency of calls to Cameron and her mother. They both turned to Janet, who avoided eye contact. I raised the issue of Ken's cell phone, and when no one spoke, I asked Carla to read a text message sent to Ken right after I asked Janet to leave. The message apologized for the trouble and expressed love. Janet covered her face with her hands, and Cameron shook his head slowly. I shared photos from an outing Janet and Sarah claimed was at the King of Prussia Mall, but was actually at Nebel Grove. Cameron questioned Janet about the hand-holding in the photos, suggesting that Ken was more than just a friend. Tears flowed slowly as this unexpected outcome unfolded. I presented more photos, indicating that they were taken at Olive Garden and Red Lobster. I mentioned the stains on Janet's underwear, but decided not to discuss them at that moment. Cameron apologized for calling me in for such a situation, expressed his upset at being tricked, and shook my hand as I left. Janet left the room sobbing like a child, and there was no discussion about the stains on her underwear at that time. Cameron assured me that the situation wouldn't be ignored. Upon returning home, Mom and Billy had already set up a fold-out bed in the living room. It wasn't a hallway, just a small extra room where I kept my computer. Billy had a pile of extra clothes in the corner that he had taken from home. Sarah wasn't home when he arrived. The most interesting thing awaiting me was the mail, but in fact, it wasn't waiting for me. It was for Janet. A beautiful official envelope from the passport department. I knew I shouldn't open it, but I couldn't help myself. It was, of course, a passport, more precisely, a family passport. The photo featured Janet and the two girls. I remember the girls mentioning getting their picture taken, but I never imagined it was for that purpose. Of course, my passport wasn't in the envelope. I immediately called Cameron and asked him to inform Janet that the goods had arrived. If she needed a passport, all she had to do was send Ken home to pick it up. I would only give it to Ken. I was usually at work when the letter arrived. I would never have known she received it. Cameron informed me they had asked Janet to find another place to live, and they had no idea where she was going. They seemed a little angry with their daughter. He promised to inform her about the passport. The dinner conversation mainly revolved around the girls. Bethany, with a shy smile, mentioned that a woman from Family Services named Jody had visited their school and talked to both of them together. They missed gym and geography due to the lengthy conversation. Beth and Britt expressed that Jody seemed to like me, though it was from a 1-hour talk. Carla interrupted dinner with a phone call, wanting to talk. We met at McDonald's, where she explained Janet's situation. Carla expressed doubts about my ability to answer questions, to which I agreed. She began by blaming Sarah for everything, describing Sarah's affair with Billy as thrilling and romantic in Janet's eyes. Janet claimed to have had a life with me that was only loving and reliable, lacking excitement and romance. Janet got involved with Ken Sanders when he joined Gilbert. While Sarah and Calvin had love-making moments, Janet and Ken were left alone, leading to a full-blown affair. She couldn't or wouldn't end it, as Ken captivated her with tales of his endeavors and proposed a trip to Spain, which she eagerly accepted. The major dilemma for Janet wasn't leaving me, but leaving the girls. She was aware that I would never allow her to take them abroad, so she planned to find a way to make me look bad. Carla explained that after talking with the girls, Janet realized they were closer to me than to her. As a result, she decided not to pursue custody if I agreed to a divorce without any conditions. I agreed to proceed without contesting it. Carla then mentioned that Janet would like to get her passport and asked if I had it with me. This raised suspicions about Janet's intentions, and I suspected she might still have hopes of taking the girls with her. The family passport played a crucial role in the deal. Carla, my coffee is cold. I'm going to go home and take a hot shower. Do not call me anymore, John. What the hell is wrong? How did I make you angry? You know damn well what you did. Do you two really think I'm that stupid? Go back to your sister and tell her there is no way she can have my daughters. Since you decided to do it, help her. I'll have to ask you never to talk to my girls again. Carla was talking on her cell phone as I left Mickey D's. I can only guess who she called. I arrived at the Family Services office before it opened. You couldn't stay away from me, could you? Jody walked into the office with a big smile on her face and a Starbucks cup in her hand. She motioned for me to sit down and apologized for not having more coffee. I think you know that I talked to your daughters yesterday. I nodded and smiled. For some reason, I was a little tongue-tied, out of my element. I remembered that the same thing happened the last time I talked to her. Since I was with Janet my whole life, I never had the opportunity to develop any social skills with other women. Looks like I've paid for it now. Is something wrong, John? Apart from that? No, I wasn't trying to be smart. I just couldn't formulate the words. I'm so sorry, Jody. I think I'd better leave. I'm not aware of all this. This morning. I'll call you later. Before you go, I would like you to know that I am getting a restraining order against your wife. I can't stop her from seeing or being with the girls, but I can stop her from taking them out of state or denying you access to them. It will be delivered to her before noon. This brought a big smile to my face, but I left the office anyway. I headed to the nearest Starbucks. This coffee definitely smelled good. Until today, everything was under control. Now, I felt disheartened and bewildered. I drove around aimlessly for a while before heading home. Billy informed me that Sarah had relocated to her parents' house near Afrida, so he was only returning to his place until he could sell or rent it out. He spent the morning at the bank, the insurance company, and the law office, hoping to secure some money from Gilbert. Unfortunately, they had no company policy against fraternization, making his efforts an uphill battle, as his lawyer explained. Passing by the hospital, he discovered Calvin was being discharged. Calvin's wife, in the process of completing her discharge paperwork, intercepted Billy, expressing her gratitude for his assistance, and explaining her attempt to persuade Calvin to drop the charges. Surprisingly, she had been trying to mend the situation with Calvin for several years without success. After Billy left, I sat on the porch, nursing a beer. Mom brought me a meatloaf sandwich and joined me in silence, sharing the beer. She mentioned that Dad would come for dinner and stay the night. When Jody Mitchell arrived, Mom retreated into the house. Jody sat beside me, declining the cold beer I offered. We sat in silence for a few moments before she spoke. I served Janet's papers about an hour ago. She was quite upset, by the way, staying with her sister. I finished the long neck I was holding. It may seem good, but why do I feel so bad? In such situations, there's nothing good, John, just less bad. I pulled out another beer, hesitated, and returned it to the refrigerator. Could you come in and explain all this to the girls? I get along with them, but no matter how carefully I phrase it, it might sound like I'm blaming their mother. I fear it could push them away. How about 7 tonight? I nodded, and she stood up, walking to her car. Halfway there, she looked back, a positive sign, and I smiled. She smiled back. Jody visited that evening and spent considerable time with Beth and Britt. Billy and I busied ourselves searching his house, removing anything that belonged to or reminded him of Sarah. Jody began frequenting our house several times a week, spending as much time with my mom as with the girls. I noticed she was avoiding me. While this suited me, I was curious. One evening, after the girls had gone to bed, she sat beside me. I felt the need to talk to her, but she initiated the conversation. She asked if I had any wine, preferably with a cork. I explained that I had wine, but they all had screw caps. She found it amusing and requested something red, so I poured a bottle into a container that resembled more of a jug. As we drank, I gathered the courage to discuss the girls' well-being during her visits. She mentioned that the twins were fine and didn't necessarily need to see her. Surprisingly, she clarified that she visited to see me, not the girls. I was confused, as she rarely engaged in conversation during her visits. She admitted that she thought I might have a rule against fraternizing with clients, which we both found amusing. To lighten the mood, she brought up the topic of tattoos and expressed surprise that I hadn't asked to see hers. I confessed that I had 4 tattoos from my high school days, 3 of which were easily visible, and 1 more discreet. She playfully suggested a game of finding the tattoos, maintaining quiet to avoid waking the girls. The 4th tattoo was in a secluded place, and I admired her for a while before she left, apparently before the twins woke up. However, I sensed they might have been aware of what occurred. I instructed my lawyer from the phone book to finalize and deliver the divorce papers. Janet, still residing with Carla, received the papers, but there was no response. Several more weeks passed, and my father's health declined. Mom spent more time with him than with me. Luckily, school concluded, and the girls spent the summer with her. By the end of summer, Dad moved to a nursing home. Billy and I assisted Mom in preparing the family home for sale, and she moved back in with me. Jody visited the girls at their mother's all summer and spent 3 or 4 evenings a week with me. They went shopping and out to dinner together, and I appreciated the attention Brittany and Bethany were giving. At least I didn't envy them anymore. I was pretty sure they knew what was going on between Jody and me. Janet called the girls about once a week, but the conversations were always short, and according to her mother, seemed tense most of the time. The twins didn't even tell me she called. Billy's divorce from Sarah was finalized. I had no idea what my status was. He also decided he wanted to start his own surveying business and asked me to come with him. I didn't have enough money to contribute until my mom came to the rescue. When she and her father ran out of money, Medicare picked up his expenses. Instead of watching it all disappear, she thought I should use it for business. I believe she also thought of it as an investment in her future. 3 months later, Billy and I had our own small surveying business. Fortunately, my drawing skills developed into drawing stories. About a week into the new semester, the twins were visited by their mother. They thought they would go to the guidance office to see Jody, and they were both disappointed to see Janet. They tried their best to be polite and respectful to her, but they still couldn't. She told them she loved them both and was sorry things turned out the way they did. She was going to Spain to see the windmills and would send them some postcards. She promised to call them every year on their birthday and send them amazing Christmas gifts. They said she cried when she left. Janet never called me to tell me she was leaving, but the next week, her parents showed up at the house. They apologized again for what Janet did, but made no attempt to defend her or justify her actions. Brittany and Bethany were their sole grandchildren, and they desired the opportunity to see them. I had no qualms about their request. They conveyed that Carla felt too ashamed to approach me, torn between her sister and her parents. 2 months later, my divorce was officially concluded. Jody and I opted to celebrate at Red Lobster. It was a rare evening without the girls, who seemed content. In fact, I believe they were somewhat elated. We spent the night at a local Holiday Inn. The twins welcomed me back with delight at 10 o'clock the following morning. Though they didn't voice it, they smiled from ear to ear throughout the day. A year later, everything was going well, but unfortunately, my father passed away. Mom considered relocating to Florida with her sister, but was reluctant to leave the girls. The twins thought their grandmother should depart, but proposed that Jody take her place, even if she couldn't cook as well as my mother. They also insisted they were old enough to have separate rooms. It was an evident and viable plan. The girls received birthday cards from their mother, but there was no phone call. She also sent numerous postcards, all depicting Spanish windmills. I wasn't sure of the significance. For Christmas, she sent 2 stylish embroidered dresses, unaware that the girls were entering their teens and might experience a growth spurt. Surprisingly, they didn't mind that the dresses were too small. Gilbert Engineering became our major client. Billy was pleased to discover that Calvin was now teaching electronics at Lebanon County Vocational School, a significant downgrade. Calvin was no longer married, and Sarah remarried and relocated to California. Ken Sanders didn't last 6 months in his new job, now working in the States, but his whereabouts remained unknown. Billy sought information through his high school's alumni association. My best friend always believed I got away with Ken too easily. Strangely, the girls continued to receive postcards featuring windmills, with no specific information, just general sentiments. Cameron informed me that Janet called them several times from her job at a travel agency in Barcelona. She never mentioned Ken or disclosed details about their past. Jody and I quietly got married in Maryland. A year later, she was expecting, and Brittany and Bethany were as thrilled as we were. They looked forward to having a goth sister, sharing a private joke that they never let me in on. The significance of Spanish windmills remained a mystery to me.
Story 4.
From the moment I joined the service, I knew my life would be shaped by extremes, harsh landscapes, tough decisions, and the ever-present shadow of danger. I remember the sweltering heat of my first deployment, the way it clung to my skin and pressed down like an unrelenting weight. I had barely begun to grasp the enormity of the responsibility I had taken on, yet I was already learning the language of discipline and sacrifice. Days bled into weeks as my team and I trained, fought, and adapted to the unyielding demands of combat, our resolve forged in the fire of experience. Over the years, I developed a hardened focus, the kind that could only be earned by surviving where others fell. Each mission was a test of endurance and ingenuity, pushing the limits of what I thought possible. Yet it wasn't just the missions that shaped me. It was the camaraderie, the unspoken bond between brothers and sisters in arms. There was solace in knowing I wasn't alone, even in the loneliest corners of the world. These experiences made me who I was on the night of that pivotal mission as I sat aboard the roaring aircraft, ready to descend into the unknown. Beneath us sprawled an endless stretch of barren desert, its silence disrupted only by the constant thunderous hum of the C-130 Hercules as it cut through the sky. The aircraft's clamor was a familiar companion, a sound as much a part of my reality as the gear strapped to my body. My team and I were seated in a rigid formation along the cabin walls, each of us focused on the meticulous ritual of checking and rechecking our equipment. It was another mission, on the surface routine, but the weight of its implications hung heavy in the air. The cabin's red light switched to green. With a final adjustment to my oxygen mask, I joined the others as we moved to the ramp. One by one, we vanished into the darkness, the cold night air whipping around us as we descended toward the earth. The jump went flawlessly. We drifted down like shadows, our black parachutes blending seamlessly with the starless sky. Touching down on the sand, I quickly detached my chute, shouldered my rifle, and scanned the horizon. A soft murmur in my earpiece confirmed the team was intact and in position. Our objective lay 5 kilometers away, a heavily fortified compound near Kandahar, believed to house a key insurgent leader. The mission's stakes were high. Eliminating this figurehead could severely disrupt enemy operations. Every step forward was deliberate, using the rugged terrain to stay concealed. The compound's high walls and sporadic guard towers loomed ahead as we split into two fire teams to approach from opposite sides. I led the right flank, ensuring every movement was precise. At exactly 0200 hours, we breached the perimeter with coordinated efficiency. Suppressed tools eliminated sentries before they could react, and the first phase was complete without incident. But the quiet didn't last. A sharp-eyed insurgent spotted movement and sounded the alarm. Chaos erupted as intense combat shattered the stillness, bullets ricocheting off walls and spraying dust into the air. "Suppressive fire!" I called into the comms, dropping to one knee to fire controlled bursts. My team responded instantly, providing cover as the second group pushed toward the main building. Inside, the compound was a labyrinth of narrow hallways and crude concrete rooms. We moved systematically, clearing each space as the defenders scrambled in disarray. Overpowered and unprepared, they didn't stand a chance. Reaching the final room, I recognized the target immediately. His face had been etched into my mind from countless briefings. He moved to grab a tool, but I reacted faster. One precise action, and it was over. "Target down," I reported calmly, though my hands trembled slightly as the adrenaline began to fade. We exited swiftly, slipping back into the desert just as reinforcements arrived, too late to save their leader. By the time we reached the extraction point, dawn was painting the horizon with shades of orange and gold. Back at base, I replayed the mission in my mind, every decision, every moment. Then the commanding officer called me in. His rare smile caught me off guard as he handed over a folded piece of paper. "Morgan, you've earned this. You're going home." Home. The word felt surreal. Months away had made it almost a distant memory. Images of reunion videos flooded my mind. Soldiers surprising their families, dogs bounding with excitement, children crying or leaping into their parents' arms. I wanted that moment, that joy. I began planning right away. The idea was simple but meaningful. I'd quietly slip into the house and surprise them, maybe during dinner or while they were watching TV. I could already see Linda's expression, her hands flying to her face in shock before she ran to embrace me. I pictured Oscar freezing for a second before breaking into a grin, older now but still my boy, leaping into my arms. And Butch, my loyal German shepherd, charging toward me, barking and wagging his tail like a propeller, trying to knock me over in excitement. The flight home felt like an eternity. Each mile brought me closer to them, Linda, Oscar, and Butch. The anticipation was nearly unbearable. I rehearsed the moment over and over, imagining their reactions and the pure joy of being reunited. Finally, I arrived. The house looked just as I remembered. White siding, blue shutters, the familiar porch where Linda loved to sip her morning coffee. My heart pounded with a mix of excitement and nerves as I stood in the driveway. It was time to go inside, to leave behind the months of separation and reclaim the life I had been longing for. I parked silently and pulled out my phone, pressing record. "Time to surprise the family," I whispered, forcing a smile at the camera. "Let's see if Butch still remembers me." The porch creaked softly under my boots as I stepped toward the front door. I called for Butch, expecting to hear the familiar sound of paws scrambling on the floor or a bark echoing through the house. Instead, there was only silence. Frowning, I stepped inside. The living room looked exactly as it should. Oscar's backpack was slung on the floor near the couch, and a half-empty glass of juice sat on the coffee table. It felt lived in, familiar, yet something about the stillness seemed off. I called out again, louder this time, but still no response. My chest tightened as I moved cautiously through the house, boots muffled on the carpet. I was heading toward the kitchen when I froze. Muffled voices drifted from the bedroom. Soft laughter, a man's voice mixed with Linda's. My pulse quickened, and the phone in my hand shook as I slowly approached the partially open door. My heart pounded, each step heavier than the last, until I reached the door and nudged it open. What I saw made my breath catch in my throat. Linda, my wife, was in bed with another man. He was shirtless, his tattooed back glistening with sweat. For a moment, the world seemed to blur, my mind unable to process the scene before me. The phone slipped from my hand, clattering to the floor. Rage surged through me. I lunged, grabbing the man by the shoulders and yanking him off the bed. He stumbled, disoriented as I swung. My fists connected with his face, his ribs, his jaw, fueled by pure anger. He tried to resist, but I was stronger, angrier, and relentless. "Stop it, Richard!" Linda's panicked voice broke through the chaos. She grabbed at my arms, tears streaking her face. "You're going to liquidate him!" But I couldn't stop. All I could see was the betrayal, the man in my house, in my bed with my wife. My knuckles hit again and again until Linda threw herself between us, forcing me back. The man collapsed to the floor, groaning, his face swollen and bruised. Linda knelt beside him, shielding him as though protecting him from a monster. "You're insane!" she screamed, her voice cracking. The sound of sirens cut through the haze of rage, growing louder with every passing second. A neighbor must have called the cops. The wail of the approaching cars jolted me slightly back to reality. I stepped away from the battered man, my chest heaving and my fists trembling, dark stains smeared across them. The front door burst open and officers stormed in. Among them was Vince Parker, a childhood friend I hadn't seen in years. His expression shifted from shock to something heavier as he took in the scene. Me standing there, fists stained, the man groaning on the floor, and Linda sobbing. "Rich," he said softly, stepping toward me, his voice barely audible. "Don't make this harder." I raised my hand slowly, military training kicking in. "Do what you have to," I muttered, voice cold and steady. Vince sighed, almost apologetically, as he cuffed my wrists. "I'll fix this," he whispered. But I said nothing. What could he possibly fix? My life had unraveled in an instant, and no words could undo it. As they led me out, I locked eyes with Linda. Her face was pale, streaked with tears, her expression a mixture of guilt and anguish. She knew the damage she had done, but I had nothing left to say to her. My gaze dropped to the man on the floor, who had the nerve to smirk through his swollen face. A fresh wave of anger swelled inside me, but I kept my mouth shut. "Start counting days," I said coldly, my voice low and unyielding before walking out the door. The fluorescent lights of the holding cell buzzed softly as I sat on the bench, staring at my bruised knuckles. My mind raced, replaying everything, every word, every punch, every moment that had led me here. Just hours ago, I had been planning a joyous reunion. Now, I was sitting in a cell, my life turned inside out, with nothing but silence and regret. The officer unlocked the cell door, handing over a phone for a single call. Without hesitation, I contacted my commanding officer, explaining the situation and seeking his help. He assured me that his daughter, Melissa, a skilled lawyer, was on her way to handle things. When Melissa arrived, her presence was immediately commanding. Confident and composed, she wasted no time in understanding the events that had unfolded. I explained everything, from my unexpected return home to the betrayal I'd discovered and the resulting altercation. She listened intently, taking notes and assessing the situation. Her initial findings were sobering. My wife had already testified against me and filed a restraining order, a move that raised more questions than answers. Melissa was determined to uncover how it had happened so quickly and vowed to fight on my behalf. The next day, I found myself in court, still in uniform. The sterile, cold atmosphere was a stark contrast to the battlefields I knew, yet the stakes felt just as high. The judge, a stern woman with sharp features, scrutinized the case closely. Her questioning revealed her disdain, particularly regarding the injuries I had inflicted on Luke Brown, the man I'd found in my home. I explained my actions with calm precision, recounting how I had perceived a threat in that moment. My years of training had conditioned me to act decisively, but my intent had not been to liquidate, only to neutralize a perceived danger. While my explanation was factual, the tension in the courtroom was palpable. Melissa remained steadfast, her professionalism unwavering despite the challenges. The weight of the accusations and the reality of my situation loomed large, but I resolved to face it with the same discipline I had carried throughout my military service. The judge called the prosecution to proceed, and Linda took the stand, her demeanor cold and detached. She avoided my gaze as she calmly explained her actions, dismissing our years together. She described Luke Brown as a supportive friend who stepped in to meet her needs during my long absences. With calculated precision, she announced that she had filed for divorce earlier that day, making it clear this was part of a well-orchestrated plan. Luke was next. He approached the stand with a smug confidence, painting himself as the reliable presence Linda needed in my absence. His words were deliberate and stung like a fresh wound, designed to provoke. Melissa's firm grip on my arm kept me grounded as the urge to react boiled within me. The prosecution then called Vincent Parker, the officer who had arrested me. Vince's testimony struck a different tone. He described my cooperation during the arrest and presented evidence from my phone, a video recording of my return home. The footage clearly showed my shock at finding Luke in my house, and my immediate reaction, driven by the belief that Linda was in danger. Despite the clarity of the evidence, Judge Brenda Smith's disdain was palpable. She addressed me with a tone dripping in condescension, emphasizing that my military background did not excuse my actions. She accused me of arrogance and dismissed my instincts as reckless. Her words were an attack on my service and character, suggesting that Linda's betrayal was somehow justified by my absence. The judge's remarks were a slap in the face. She framed my deployment as neglect, minimizing my sacrifices while justifying Linda's actions. The frustration boiled over, and I stood, slamming my hands on the table. My voice rose, cutting through the courtroom silence as I called out the absurdity of her reasoning. I questioned if my service to the country and orders from the president were to blame for my marriage's collapse, pushing the mockery to its limit. The tension in the room was electric, and the judge's face flushed with anger. Her response was swift and cold, sentencing me to 3 months in prison for contempt of court. The gavel's echo sealed the verdict, leaving the room in a stunned silence. I stood tall, my chest heaving with controlled breaths. Meeting her gaze one last time, I spoke with quiet resolve. "Start counting." Then, without another word, I turned and faced the consequences, refusing to let her see me broken. Time seemed to pause as the gavel struck, signaling the end of the session. The judge rose without a glance in my direction, her dismissal final and sharp. The guards escorted me back to my cell, their footsteps echoing through the corridor before the heavy door slammed shut behind me. I stood motionless, absorbing the sterile hum of fluorescent lights and the distant murmurs of inmates. This was my new reality, a battlefield of steel and concrete. Melissa's scolding echoed in my mind. She'd berated me for my courtroom outburst, accusing me of throwing away a chance to build a solid defense. Her disappointment was evident, but I'd already resigned myself to this outcome. The system had made its decision, and I wasn't going to grovel for understanding. The first days in the cell block were a test. Inmates measured me with every glance, guards mocked me with the nickname Captain America, and the air was thick with tension. The challenge came quickly. A man called Big Red confronted me in the yard. He was built like a boulder, his tattoos adding to his intimidating presence. His challenge was clear, but I didn't waste words. The fight ended swiftly. A precise elbow to his gut, a leg sweep, and a forearm to his throat. Word spread fast. By the third day, no one else dared to test me. One afternoon, a guard banged on my cell and informed me of a visitor. At first, I assumed it was Melissa, ready to lecture me again. But when he mentioned Linda's name, my stomach churned. I debated refusing, but curiosity won. What could she possibly have to say? In the visiting area, Linda entered with an air of composure, wearing a sundress I didn't recognize. Likely something Luke had bought her. She sat across from me, her voice casual and smug, recounting how Luke had moved in with his son, Brandon. She described her life as complete, her words cutting deeper than any insult. I stayed silent, letting her dig herself into the grave she seemed eager to build. She mistook my silence for defeat, smirking as she claimed life had a way of working out. I smiled back, a cold, venomous smile, and leaned forward. My voice was low but deliberate, as I told her to keep counting because payback was inevitable. Her smirk faltered for a moment, but she recovered quickly, rising from the chair with unsettling calm. As she turned to leave, she delivered one final blow. "Oh, and Butch is dead!" Her words struck like a knife. I froze, disbelief flashing across my face. She explained without emotion, claiming the dog had tried to bite Luke. Her decision to have him euthanized was delivered as casually as if she discarded an old pair of shoes. Rage surged, but I held it back. Rising to my feet, I simply said, "Add it to the list, and don't stop counting." Then, I turned and walked away. The days inside blended into a relentless rhythm of workouts and vigilance. Each second crawled by, but I marked them all, counting down to the day I would walk out. One day at a time, I prepared for what would come next. About a week into my sentence, Vince showed up unannounced. The guard called my name, and I didn't hesitate. It was a relief to see a familiar face, someone who didn't see me as just another inmate. In the visitation room, Vince looked different, worn down like he was carrying a weight too heavy to shake. He leaned in, speaking low to avoid being overheard. While he admitted he couldn't help me legally, he hinted at another way. He had people, ones who owed him favors and were willing to assist once I was out. His words carried weight. Vince wasn't one to make empty promises. I nodded, trusting his judgment. Time dragged on, but I stayed out of trouble, waiting for the day I'd walk free. When it finally came, Vince was there, waiting in his car. The ride to his place was quiet. He wasn't much for small talk, and neither was I. His house reflected the man himself, simple, functional, and empty of any personal touch. Over drinks, he opened up, sharing a story I hadn't expected. Years ago, his wife had cheated on him. Back then, as a cop, he'd felt helpless against a system that didn't care about his pain. The bitterness in his voice was unmistakable as he recounted how the courts and the system had let him down. He saw himself in me, the same anger, the same betrayal. Arresting me, he admitted, had been a reminder of his own scars. Now, he didn't want me to endure the same downward spiral. Vince made a few calls, his tone clipped and efficient. Soon, a car pulled up outside and 3 men stepped inside, each bringing a distinct presence to the room. Vince introduced them one by one, their stories as heavy as their reputations. First was Nate, a towering, muscular figure who had once been a bar bouncer. He'd intervened to protect a woman from an entitled rich kid. That intervention cost him everything, as the kid's influential father ensured Nate took the fall. A prison sentence followed, during which Nate's mother passed away from cancer. Vince, unable to save her, carried guilt alongside Nate's loss. Next was Mario, a wiry man with sharp eyes behind thick glasses. A tech genius, he'd once exposed corruption at his company, naively trusting the system. Instead, the same system framed him for fraud, sending him to prison for 5 years. Now, he used his skills as a hacker, his quiet demeanor masking a brilliant mind. Finally, there was Chuck, a short, heavy-set man who seemed out of place among the others. His friendly demeanor was deceptive. He was a chemistry prodigy turned meth cook in his youth. Success brought attention, and a tip-off landed him in prison. Despite his past, Vince vouched for his expertise, insisting Chuck's skills could be invaluable. As I took in these unlikely allies, Vince's plan became clearer, but frustration simmered beneath the surface. Pulling him aside, I questioned the necessity of involving them. My instincts screamed to handle things myself, to face my enemies directly and reclaim what was mine. But Vince's steady gaze stopped me short. This wasn't just about revenge, it was about ensuring I survived the battles ahead. Vince's laugh rang out loud and clear, the kind of laugh that told me he'd heard it all before. He shook his head, almost amused by my anger, and spelled it out for me. If I went through with my plan, I'd end up back in jail. Meanwhile, Linda would still be shacked up with her lover, living off my money, while I rotted behind bars. He made it painfully clear that this wasn't the solution I was looking for. I raked a hand through my hair, the frustration building inside me, but Vince wasn't done. He reminded me of the one thing I hadn't stopped to think about. My son. Still a minor, he said. Still someone who needed me to make the right decisions. He told me to stay out of the light, to let the professionals handle it. And then he dropped another bombshell. Linda hadn't just betrayed me emotionally. She'd broken the law by moving her lover and his kid into my house. That hit me hard. I'd been so blinded by rage, I hadn't fully grasped the depth of what was happening. The next morning, I knew I had to take control. The anger was still there, but my mind was sharp, focused. I called my mom and laid everything out for her. I didn't even need to explain much. She wasn't surprised. She had always seen through Linda, and now her warnings made all the sense in the world. I need your help, I told her, and she didn't hesitate. The house was hers, and I needed her to step in and take it back. Linda had turned it into her playground, and I wasn't going to let that continue. My mom agreed immediately, saying she'd send the notice for Linda to leave. There was no hesitation in her voice, only resolve, and that gave me a strange sense of relief. Then came the call I had been expecting. Linda. Her number popped up on the screen, and I answered, ready for what I knew was coming. She didn't disappoint. Her voice was a mix of venom and fury, throwing insults and accusations at me like daggers. I stayed silent, letting her scream until her anger started to run out of steam. When her tone shifted to pleading, I knew she was trying a new angle. She begged, saying our son needed the house and that I was being unfair to him. I kept my voice steady, unemotional. I told her the truth. It wasn't my house. The owner wanted it back, and there was nothing more to say. I didn't give her time to respond. I ended the call and let the silence on her end speak for itself. That evening, I sat across from Mario in Vince's cramped, dimly lit living room. Mario was the guy for the kind of work I needed. I explained my plan. I wanted access to Linda's phone and her lover's. I wanted everything. Texts, emails, photos, any dirt I could use. Mario didn't flinch. He raised an eyebrow, clearly impressed by how far I was willing to go, and asked if I was sure. I was sure. More sure than I'd ever been about anything. They had taken everything from me, and now it was my turn to take something from them. Mario led me to his workspace, a tiny room crowded with wires and glowing monitors. The place hummed with the sound of machinery, and he looked completely at home there. He explained the process in simple terms: an email, a link, and then a bot that would give him full access to their phones. It was straightforward, and he worked fast, his hands flying across the keyboard. "Now we wait," he said, hitting the final key and sending the emails. He told me it could take minutes or hours, depending on how long it took for their curiosity to get the better of them. But he was confident they would click. Later that night, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Mario. "I'm in, collecting dirt." The first step in my revenge was complete. The following day, my phone buzzed with an incoming call. Glancing at the screen, I recognized the number instantly. Bracing myself, I answered, knowing this wasn't going to be a casual chat. Colonel Walker's voice came through, firm but heavy, the tone he used when things were serious. He told me that higher-ups, far above the usual chain of command, were making noise about my recent courtroom outburst. Apparently, my mention of suing the president had struck a nerve. It wasn't just talk anymore. It was a headline that had ruffled feathers in powerful places. I listened in silence, my jaw tightening as I processed his words. Walker, someone who'd always valued my directness, admitted I'd walked into something much larger than I realized. Challenges to authority, especially public ones, didn't sit well in those circles. Before he could say more, I cut in, making my decision clear. I would resign. It was the only way to prevent the fallout from spreading to others. Walker pushed back, but I wouldn't budge. My career had already been overshadowed by this mess, and it was better to step away than drag my service and reputation through the mud. The pause on his end told me he understood, though he didn't like it. With a tinge of regret in his voice, he promised to push for an honorable discharge, acknowledging my years of dedicated service. I thanked him genuinely before the line went dead. Staring at the phone, I felt the weight of finality settle over me. My military career, something I'd poured my life into, was over. That evening, a knock at the door broke my thoughts. Mario strolled in, grinning like he'd just hit the jackpot. He carried a flash drive in one hand and his laptop under his arm. With his signature swagger, he declared he had everything I'd asked for, and then some. Curious but cautious, I watched as he plugged the drive into his laptop. The screen lit up, folders neatly labeled, and Mario's grin widened as he began to explain. There was enough incriminating material here to destroy both Linda and her lover, Luke. Explicit texts, emails, and videos painted a sordid picture of their relationship. But that wasn't all. Mario revealed something darker: Luke's involvement in pills trafficking. He wasn't a kingpin, but he was a transporter, moving small quantities for a network that included cops and judges. That kind of protection explained why he'd managed to operate under the radar for so long. I leaned in, absorbing every detail as Mario broke it down. He had spent hours organizing the data into folders, one for the affair, another for the pills dealings, and a third for everything else. I thanked him for his thoroughness, and he assured me that everything was securely backed up in multiple locations. He handed me the password, a complex mix of symbols and letters, urging me to memorize it and destroy the paper. As I held the key to their destruction in my hands, Mario's parting words echoed in my mind. This information was dynamite. He was right. I knew it. And I also knew exactly how I would use it. Meanwhile, at the house, Linda's frustration boiled over. She paced the living room, her anger sharp and vocal as she ranted about being forced out. To her, this was an unforgivable betrayal, and she didn't bother hiding her disdain for my mother, who owned the property. Luke, ever the calm opportunist, leaned back and shrugged off her tirade. He assured her they'd find a way to fix things. When she snapped at him for his nonchalance, he simply smirked and pulled out his phone. His tone turned colder as he told her not to worry. The problem would be dealt with soon. Linda froze, her anger giving way to confusion as she pressed him for an explanation. Luke avoided specifics, brushing off her questions as he scrolled through his contacts. Walking to a family photo of me and my mother, he glanced at it before dialing. When the call connected, his voice dropped, and he spoke in code. It was clear he was giving someone instructions, details about what he called a cleanup. After sending a text, presumably with my mother's picture, Luke returned to the living room, his smirk intact. Linda's suspicion deepened, but he brushed it off again, telling her it was handled. Her unease was evident, but Luke's confidence was unwavering. He leaned back, relaxed, while Linda stood frozen, unsure of what she'd just witnessed. As much as she hated my mother, something about Luke's calm promise unsettled her. Mario's surveillance system detected a critical phone call through its keyword algorithm. The device began to beep, prompting Mario to investigate. Realizing the severity of what he'd intercepted, he grabbed his laptop and quickly brought it to where I was sitting with Vince. He showed us a recorded phone call extracted from Luke's device. The audio revealed Luke discussing my mother, Michelle Morgan, by name. He mentioned sending her photo to someone. It became instantly clear. Luke wasn't bluffing. He had taken steps to target my mother. Mario confirmed the photo had been sent to a known criminal, making the threat disturbingly real. The weight of the situation hit hard. Vince immediately recognized the urgency, stating the need for fast action to protect my mother. Mario was already tracking the recipient of the call, working as quickly as possible, but time wasn't on our side. Without hesitation, I armed myself and prepared to act. Vince instinctively reached for his radio to alert his department, but I stopped him. Knowing Luke's influence extended to local law enforcement, we couldn't risk involving compromised officers. Vince understood the danger and agreed to handle it independently. Together, we raced to my mother's house. Though the drive was only minutes long, every second felt excruciating. When we arrived, we parked a few houses away to remain unnoticed. I called my mother, instructing her to secure the doors, avoid answering for anyone, and immediately contact emergency services to report an attempted break-in. My mother, quick-witted and composed, assured me she understood before ending the call. From our concealed position, we watched as a figure approached the house. The man moved deliberately, slipping into the shadows near the front entrance. Vince's radio crackled with a report of a potential break-in at the address. As the nearest officer on duty, Vince responded and drove to the house, pulling into the driveway without activating his siren to avoid tipping off the intruder. Before exiting the vehicle, Vince made it clear I was to stay behind. He activated his body camera and proceeded toward the house. From inside the car, I could hear his commanding voice ordering the suspect to disarm. Moments later, a chaotic scuffle ensued. Furniture toppled, and 3 sharp cracks shattered the stillness of the neighborhood. My heart pounded as I gripped the edge of the seat, straining to see through the dim light. Vince emerged from the house a short time later, calm and collected. He reported over the radio that the armed suspect had been neutralized and requested medical support. Returning to the car, he conveyed the situation with a measured demeanor, confirming the threat had been eliminated. Relief washed over me, though the gravity of what had happened lingered heavily. Later that evening, we regrouped to assess the broader situation. Vince emphasized the importance of swiftly dismantling Luke's network before they could strike again. Chuck, who had been monitoring Luke's activities, provided key details about an upcoming pills delivery. In 3 days, Luke was set to transport a package from a downtown pickup point to a contact on Maple Drive. Chuck revealed that this contact was the same individual who had betrayed his previous operation to law enforcement. With this knowledge, Chuck had been tracking Luke and his associates, waiting for an opportunity to expose them. He outlined the importance of intercepting this delivery, explaining that doing so would disrupt their entire operation. The team agreed that the plan required precision and urgency. Chuck's detailed intel and Vince's strategic oversight made it clear we had one opportunity to get this right. For me, the stakes were deeply personal. Luke had crossed every line, and this was our chance to bring him and his criminal dealings to an end. I waited in my car, parked discreetly just off the main road, my eyes fixed on every passing vehicle. Everything hinged on this moment. Chuck had laid out the route Luke would take, and all the preparations were in place. My pulse quickened as I scanned the road, ready to act. Soon, I spotted it, a car matching Chuck's description. My grip tightened on my phone as I made the call, delivering the signal to Vince. Moments later, the roar of Vince's engine cut through the stillness as his car surged forward, its sirens screaming. I watched as Luke's car approached, and Vince gave chase, the pursuit quickly escalating. Luke's car accelerated, the sound of its tires gripping the asphalt barely audible over the wail of the sirens. Vince stayed close, refusing to let him escape. The situation took a sudden, violent turn. Luke's car swerved, its tires screeching before losing control entirely. It spun wildly, fishtailing before skidding off the road. My breath caught as I watched the car flip repeatedly. One roll, then another and another, until it came to rest on its side, a mangled heap of metal and shattered glass. I slammed my car into gear and sped toward the wreck, my chest pounding. Arriving first on the scene, I jumped out and raced to the vehicle. The destruction was worse up close. Glass scattered everywhere. The frame crumpled beyond recognition. Vince was already there, wrenching the door open with focused determination. He worked quickly, pulling the driver free and dragging them to safety. But as I looked closer, my stomach dropped. The driver wasn't Luke. It was his son, Alistair. The boy, no older than 19, was pale and bleeding profusely. Vince moved with urgency, calling for medics as he tried to stabilize him, but it was clear Alistair's condition was dire. His breaths were shallow, and his unfocused eyes hinted at the inevitable. My chest tightened as I realized there was nothing anyone could do. By the time the paramedics arrived, Alistair was gone. Later, I stood across the street from the police station, watching as Luke walked out on bail. His smug demeanor only fueled my anger. He shamelessly shifted the blame onto his dead son, claiming ignorance of the pills in the car. His brazenness was infuriating, but it was his indifference to Alistair's death that made my rage boil. Luke had lost his son, yet he treated it as nothing more than an inconvenience. As he left the station, his eyes met mine across the crowd. He didn't seem surprised to see me there, and his expression shifted to a confident smirk as he approached. He stopped in front of me, his posture radiating arrogance. My voice was low and sharp as I confronted him, warning him of the consequences of his actions. For the first time, I saw a flicker of fear in his eyes, though he quickly masked it. Stepping closer, I left him with a final warning, one that hung heavily in the air. This wasn't over. My thoughts drifted to my own son, Oscar, who I hadn't seen in months. Linda had made sure to sever any line of communication, leaving me completely in the dark about his well-being. The helplessness gnawed at me daily, the uncertainty eating away at my resolve. Desperate for answers, I confided in Vince, recounting my confrontation with Luke and my fears for Oscar's safety. Vince listened intently, his expression hardening with every word. When I finished, he spoke with quiet determination, vowing to end the chaos once and for all. He wasted no time, making calls to set things in motion. His first call was to Nate, tasking him with tracking Oscar. Vince insisted on a cautious approach, emphasizing the importance of keeping the search discreet to avoid drawing attention. Protecting Oscar was the top priority. Next, Vince contacted Mario, instructing him to compile every piece of evidence against Luke, the corrupt officers, and the compromised judges. The files were to be sent directly to the FBI and media outlets, ensuring the truth would come to light. There would be no more hiding or protecting Luke's criminal network. Finally, Vince reached out to Chuck. The plan was clear. Pills would be planted in Linda's car. It wasn't a decision that required discussion. Vince knew it was the leverage needed to force her hand. The final step was to involve Child Protective Services. If there was any hope of protecting Oscar and putting an end to the chaos, this was the way forward. Every move Vince made was calculated, designed to dismantle Luke's web of lies and ensure justice was served. The morning began with a call from Vince, his voice calm but purposeful as he informed me the plan was underway. Chuck and Nate were tailing Linda as she went about her routine, every movement carefully tracked. For me, the hours dragged on endlessly as I waited for news, hoping against hope that this would bring me closer to Oscar. Finally, my phone buzzed, snapping me out of my restless thoughts. Linda had arrived at a house on Pine Cove, Vince explained. Chuck and Nate had spotted her going inside, and with her was Oscar. The mention of my son's name sent a surge of adrenaline through me. After months of agony and uncertainty, Oscar was within reach. Every instinct screamed at me to rush to that house, to take him back right then and there. But I couldn't jeopardize the operation. Vince and his team had a plan, and I needed to trust them. Outside the house, Chuck and Nate observed Linda disappear through the front door, oblivious to their presence. Nate approached her car with an air of nonchalance, while Chuck followed closely, clutching a small bag that would ultimately seal her fate. In a practiced motion, Nate ensured the area was clear before gently opening the car door. Chuck placed the bag strategically, somewhere discreet but impossible to miss during a thorough search. The two walked away without looking back, their movements smooth and calculated. Moments later, Nate dialed emergency from a burner phone, reporting the suspicious vehicle. Vince was the closest officer to respond. His calm and commanding presence would have been enough to disarm any situation, and I imagined him stepping into action with his usual efficiency. He alerted both Child Protective Services and dispatch, ensuring that every angle was covered. Then, armed with paperwork to maintain appearances, Vince entered the house. Inside, Linda's arrogant demeanor likely faltered as Vince informed her of her arrest. I could picture her initial defiance, the sneer on her face, twisting into disbelief as the reality of the situation set in. But Vince wasn't the type to tolerate resistance, and the arrest was swift and methodical. Meanwhile, agents from Child Protective Services moved past Linda's protests to assess the environment and, ultimately, Oscar's safety. The moment I'd been waiting for finally came when Vince called to tell me that Oscar was safe and en route to me. Relief and anger clashed inside me as I gripped the phone, every emotion I'd suppressed over the past months threatening to overwhelm me. When the agents brought Oscar to me, the sight of him nearly undid me. His expression held confusion and fear, but when his eyes met mine, recognition flickered there. The moment they handed him over, I held him close, the weight of months of separation dissolving into relief. Later, back at my mom's house, I pieced together why Linda and Luke had hidden Oscar in that house. They were trying to alienate him from me, laying the groundwork to claim I'd abandoned him. The restraining order and my time in jail had given them the opportunity to create a false narrative, one they hoped would hold up in court. But none of that mattered now. Oscar was with me, and I wasn't letting him go. That evening, while Oscar settled into the safety of my mom's home, Vince called with grim news. Linda had made bail. The timing sent a chill through me, but Vince reassured me that the FBI had received the incriminating documents and was already moving forward. The relief was short-lived. Later that night, Vince called again, his voice tense with urgency. Mario had intercepted a call revealing that Linda and Luke were headed to my mother's house. Vince and his team were en route, but until they arrived, it was up to me to keep Oscar safe. I instructed my mom to take Oscar upstairs to the main bedroom, lock the door, and open it for no one but me or Vince. Her pale but determined face reassured me as she ushered Oscar away. Alone in the darkened living room, I turned off every light, Glock in hand, and waited. The minutes dragged like hours, my senses heightened with every faint sound. The kitchen doorknob jiggled, breaking the silence. My pulse quickened as I moved behind the dining table, crouching low. The door creaked open, revealing the bulky silhouette of Luke. He stepped inside, a rifle clutched in his hands, his presence menacing. Moments later, Linda followed, her tool glinting faintly in the dim light. Their desperation was evident. Choosing this reckless, armed confrontation over a legal battle spoke to their desperation and arrogance. I crept forward, each step deliberate and silent. When I was directly behind Luke, I reached for the light switch and flicked it on. The room flooded with light, and in one swift motion, I pressed the barrel of my Glock against Luke's neck. My voice was steady, low, and unyielding as I issued my ultimatum. The tension in the room was palpable, but I wasn't backing down. Luke's rifle wavered slightly in his grip, and for the first time, I saw hesitation in his eyes. This time, I wasn't letting him or anyone else hurt my family. Luke froze, his face draining of color as his wide eyes locked onto mine. He must have seen it, the unwavering resolve, the fury burning just beneath the surface, and the complete absence of fear. His grip loosened, and the rifle slipped from his hands, hitting the floor with a dull thud. Out of the corner of my eye, I caught Linda still holding her tool, her hands trembling as she aimed it at me. I turned my attention to her, my voice cutting through the tension like a blade. Her knuckles whitened as she hesitated, fear and defiance warring in her expression. After what felt like an eternity, she finally let the Colt drop, nudging it toward me with a hesitant push of her foot. I kept my focus locked on them, scooping up the tool while keeping the rifle in sight. With both tools in my hands, I demanded answers. Luke remained silent, his jaw clenched tight, but Linda's ragged breaths and darting eyes gave her away. It didn't take long before Luke finally spoke, his words chilling in their bluntness. He admitted they had come to liquidate me and my mother, planning to burn the house down to cover their tracks. His tone was cold, almost casual, as if it were a simple task to erase lives. The rage building in me was almost too much to contain. I glared at them, disbelief mingling with fury. When Linda's composure cracked, she erupted into a stream of venomous threats. She swore she'd take Oscar from me in court, painting me as an unfit father. Her words were sharp, laced with malice, but it was her final accusation that struck the hardest, blaming me for Alistair's death. Luke, calmer but no less dangerous, stepped forward, his tone laced with malice. He vowed I'd know the pain of losing a son, his words icy and deliberate. The audacity of their threats ignited something deep and primal within me. My vision narrowed, the sound of their voices fading into a low hum as everything else fell away. Lowering the tool, I reached for the rifle Luke had dropped. Its weight felt heavy and final as I checked the chamber. 2 shells loaded and ready. I snapped it shut, the sound echoing in the tense silence. Linda's face went pale and her breaths came in sharp gasps. Luke stood frozen, his false bravado stripped away and replaced by unmistakable fear. My voice was calm, measured as I locked eyes with Luke. He had come here to take everything from me, but the tables had turned. With unflinching precision, I raised the rifle and fired. The blast was deafening, smoke and burnt residue filling the air. Luke's body crumpled, the force of the impact throwing him back. He lay motionless, his chest torn open, the life gone from his eyes. I turned to Linda, her tear-streaked face a mask of terror. She shook her head, muttering desperate pleas that grew louder as panic overtook her. I took a step closer, the rifle steady in my grip. Her cries fell on deaf ears. This wasn't about mercy. It was about justice for what they'd done to my family. Her words blended into a distant echo as I pulled the trigger again. Another deafening blast, then silence. Sinking onto the couch, I rested the rifle across my lap. The acrid scent of smoke lingered in the air, mingling with the ringing in my ears. My thoughts raced, a storm of emotions threatening to pull me under. The creak of the front door snapped me back to reality. Vince stepped inside, his sharp eyes taking in the scene, the bodies, the shattered quiet of my home. Without hesitation, he headed upstairs to check on my mom and Oscar. Moments later, he escorted them outside, shielding Oscar's eyes from the chaos. When he returned, his expression was a mix of grim resolve and faint satisfaction. He stood over me, his voice low but steady as he assured me the situation was under control. Vince made a few calls, summoning reinforcements to clean up the scene. While waiting, he shared updates. Judge Brenda Smith, who had been lenient with Luke's associates, was now in custody. The noose was tightening around the remaining corrupt figures in Luke's network. Each piece falling into place brought a semblance of order to the chaos. Placing a firm hand on my shoulder, Vince offered a grim reminder. They came into your home with the intent to liquidate. You're a Navy SEAL. You defended yourself, took control of the tool, and neutralized the threat. That's the report, and you stick to it. Not a word more, not a word less. I nodded, the weight of his words sinking in. Vince was my anchor in this storm, his presence a steady reminder that justice, however messy, had finally been served. A few minutes later, I found myself stepping into the police station, every detail around me feeling distant and unreal, as if I were moving through a haze. Vince handed me a stack of papers to sign, and I barely glanced at them, trusting him to handle the particulars. My hand moved mechanically, my thoughts elsewhere. The next thing I knew, I was back in Vince's car, the low hum of the engine filling the silence between us. He didn't say much on the drive, only giving me a glance now and then. When we reached my house, he finally spoke, his tone steady and firm, telling me to get some rest. I nodded, stepping out of the car. Vince waited until I was inside before pulling away. 2 weeks later, I received a call from my commanding officer. His voice was neutral, but the weight behind it was unmistakable. He informed me that an honorable discharge had been secured. It wasn't how I envisioned leaving the service, but I knew better than to protest. He asked me to come in to finalize the paperwork. Driving to the base one last time, I felt the bittersweet pull of familiarity. The hallways, once alive with purpose and camaraderie, now felt strangely hollow. Memories of shared hardships and victories flickered through my mind, mingling with the sting of recent events. In his office, my CO greeted me with his usual imposing presence, though there was something softer in his demeanor. As I signed the final documents, he watched me closely, arms crossed. When I finished, he spoke, his tone quieter than I'd ever heard it. He acknowledged the disruption my courtroom outburst had caused, admitting it had unsettled those in power. But he also shared that many had admired my actions, even if they couldn't say so openly. His words hit me differently, leaving me at a loss for a response. We shook hands, and I walked out, knowing it was the last time I'd see those walls. Outside, I headed toward my car, a swirl of relief and regret settling in my chest. One chapter of my life had ended, and another was waiting to begin. When I got home, Oscar was standing at the door, his face lighting up the second he saw me. He bolted toward me, wrapping his arms around my waist in a hug that drove away every dark thought. As I held him close, something small and energetic darted out from behind him. A German shepherd puppy, tail wagging so furiously it was a blur. The pup bounded up to me, leaping and licking my hands with sloppy enthusiasm. Oscar's laugh was infectious, and I found myself laughing with him. When I asked where the little guy had come from, Oscar explained with a grin that Mario had dropped him off, claiming I needed a new partner. That evening, I met up with Nate, Mario, and Chuck at a bar. The four of us shared drinks, swapping stories and jabs, the tension of the past weeks finally giving way to laughter. The bar settled into its usual rhythm, the clink of glasses and hum of conversation, creating a rare sense of normalcy. We were halfway through another round when a shadow loomed over the table. Looking up, I recognized a towering figure immediately. It was Ralph, his broad shoulders practically blocking out the overhead light. His weathered face broke into a grin as he greeted me like a long-lost brother. The force of his hug nearly knocked the air out of me, but I didn't mind. Introducing him to the others, I explained Ralph's reputation as the Wrecker, a demolitions expert who had worked with SEAL teams countless times. The group sized him up with curiosity and respect as he sat down, the chair groaning under his weight. I slid a fresh beer across the table and we caught up briefly. Then Vince arrived, sliding into the seat next to me. He looked between us, asking if he'd missed anything. Ralph's face turned uncharacteristically serious. In a low voice, he told us about a Mexican pills lord known as the Soup Maker. His name alone silenced the table. Mario froze mid-sip, his usual smirk vanishing. Nate and Chuck exchanged grim looks, clearly recognizing the name. Vince looked puzzled, the only one out of the loop. Ralph explained he'd been tracking the Soup Maker for months and had followed him here. His voice was calm, but resolute, as he told us he wasn't looking for backup. He was looking for a team. He needed people he could trust to help him end the Soup Maker for good. The gravity of his words hung in the air, and I knew this wasn't just another mission. It was personal for Ralph. And now, it was personal for us too. As I watched Ralph outline the details of his mission, a quiet resolve settled over me. The room was heavy with tension, each of us processing what this meant. My gaze drifted to the frothy beer on the table, the condensation tracing slow paths down the glass, as if marking the fleeting moments of calm we had left. The Soup Maker. Even saying the name felt like invoking something ancient and unrelenting. Ralph's reputation preceded him. If he said this was serious, then it was. Yet a part of me, a part tempered by loss and betrayal, felt oddly at peace. This, at least, was a battle I could control. No blurred lines, no false allies, just a clear enemy and a shared purpose. Mario broke the silence first, his voice tinged with reluctant humor. You know, I just got comfortable, Ralph, and here you are dragging me back into the fire. He grinned, but his eyes betrayed his apprehension. Nate, ever the stoic, simply nodded. If Ralph says it's worth it, I'm in. No questions asked. Chuck hesitated, his usual easygoing demeanor replaced by a pensive frown. I ain't built for heroics, he said, rubbing the back of his neck. But if it means putting this Soup Maker guy out of commission, count me in. Vince leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, his calculating gaze locked on Ralph. You sure you want to go this route? You could pull in any number of teams. Why us? Ralph's reply was simple, but it hit home. Because I trust you, and trust is all that matters out there. As he spoke, I felt the familiar pull of duty, an instinct honed through years of service. It was a strange kind of gravity, drawing me toward action, even as part of me longed to stay anchored in the fragile peace I had built. I'm in, I said, my voice steady. All eyes turned to me. Not just because Ralph asked, but because I need this. I need to remember what it feels like to fight for something that matters. Ralph's eyes softened and he nodded. The room shifted, the unspoken bond between us solidifying. This wasn't just a team, it was a family, forged in the fires of shared pain and purpose. As the night wore on, plans began to form. Maps were drawn, routes were plotted, and roles were assigned. It felt like old times, the rhythm of preparation and anticipation rekindling something deep within me. Later, as I lay in bed, the weight of everything settled over me. The stakes were higher than ever, and the scars I carried, both visible and unseen, felt heavier in the quiet darkness. Yet for the first time in months, I felt a spark of hope. This was more than a mission. It was a chance to reclaim something I thought I'd lost, the belief that, no matter how broken the world might seem, there was always a way forward. And so, as the first light of dawn broke through the window, I rose with a newfound purpose. The fight ahead would be brutal, but it was a fight worth taking. For Ralph, for the team, and for the chance to finally put the past to rest. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about redemption. And I was ready.